Good evening. Can I welcome you to the Scrutiny panel meeting of the 14th of March 2023. There are no practice evacuations planned for this evening, so if the alarms sound, it's for real, and we evacuate the town hall by going down the main staircase or the back stairs to High Street, Orterson to Rumnell Street car park. The meeting is being broadcast live over the internet. And you can watch it on the council's YouTube channel afterwards if you so wish. Discreet use of mobile phones and other devices is welcomed, but you're asked to set them to silent and not use voice or camera flashes and other functions which would distract the speaker. We have a break at 7:30 every 90 minutes thereafter, or as is convenient to fit in with agenda items as they come along. I'm Dennis Willits, chairman of the panel. I represent the Lexton and Braeswick ward, and I'm the chair.
Thank you. I'm Councillor Sue Lucy Moore, Prittigate ward.
Councillor William Sunnox, Rural North ward.
Councillor Paul Smith, St Anne's and St John's ward.
Councillor Sam McCarthy representing Shrub End ward.
Mike Lilly representing Old Heath, the Hive and Row Hedge ward.
Lee Scholars for Old Heath, Hive and Row Hedge.
Would our visitors like to introduce themselves? This is because this is just for the soundtrack rather than so go all the way around the table.
Laura Taylor-Green, Director of the North East Essex Alliance.
Jess Leonard, Community 360.
Colin Cox, District Commander for Colchester.
Louise Irons, Executive Lead for Innovation and Growth, Community 360. Evening, everybody. Tracy Rudling, Chief Exec, Community 360.
Lucy Bredman, Strategic Director of the City Council.
Owen Howell, Democratic Services Officer.
Mel Rundle, Senior Support to Panel, sorry.
And Councillor Luxford-Bourne, Portfolio Holder for Planning Infrastructure.
And we also have David King, Leader of the Council, with us should we need to consult him on in any other issues. Item 2, substitutions. There is one substitution, I believe, this evening.
Yes, I'm substituting for Darius Laws.
Urgent items, there are none. Declarations of interest, colleagues. Any declarations? If we fall over any on the way through the agenda, please do announce them so that they can be recorded. There are no minutes to be approved at this particular meeting. Item 6, general have your say. Are there any speakers? There are no public speakers who wish to address the panel. Item 7, decisions taken under special urgency provisions. There are no such decisions. Cabinet and portfolio holder decisions called in for a review. There are none. Item 9 is items requested by members of the panel or members of the council to be added to the work programme. Are there any matters which colleagues wish to bring forward as prospective new items for scrutiny by the panel? Thank you. That takes us, having got over the normal bureaucracy, that takes us on to the first main item of the evening, which is to scrutinise the work of the One Colchester Partnership. We have looked at part of their remit at earlier meetings, certainly with the under our alternative hat of the crime panel, crime prevention function, which we also carry out wearing different hats. And at those meetings, we identified the extent to which the One Colchester Partnership was now integral to the delivery of many services of the council. And we were of the opinion that it would be useful to have a sort of high-level scrutiny of the partnership, how it works, what it does, how much it spends, and so on. So that is going to be the first principal item on the agenda. We have visitors who've already introduced themselves from the some of the components of the One Colchester Partnership. The way this works is we have a detailed briefing paper from you in advance of the meeting, which we will all have read. I can't guarantee we've memorized it, but we've all read and understood it. We ask you to do a presentation of the order of 10 minutes or so, just adding anything which you think important and has not been included in the paper, and just an opportunity to summarize what are the really important issues salient to the One Colchester partnership as viewed from the City Council. After your 10-minute presentation, we will then probably spend about 30 to 40 minutes asking you questions where we've sort of failed to follow arguments, or whether we want further information or follow lines of questioning. After which we will have 10 minutes or so to speak amongst ourselves to decide whether there are any recommendations we wish to make. On most occasions, there are no recommendations. We hear what's going on. It's well planned, well organised, well staffed, and we just thank you for your attendance. But if there are any matters where we have concern, they may be sort of reflected back to you as a recommendation, or to the cabinet as appropriate. And that's how it works. Shouldn't be too painful. And I'm sure you've done it many, many times before. So can I call upon Tracy Rudling to open the batting and just whiz through your report and bring out any really salient items where you think we need to follow to get things going. Thank you.
So lovely. Thank you very much for inviting us here tonight to really be able to showcase the work of One Colchester. But I'd like to start by thanking other colleagues in the room as well that are part of and represent One Colchester, and believing really in this as a partnership approach, because as we know, it really has saved lives in respect of the work that we've been doing. So if we could move the slides on, please. I just want to talk a little bit about how One Colchester came about and the history. So many of you that have been about as long as I have will remember that we had Colchester 2020, which was a local strategic partnership board. And it had a statutory investment in it, and as a statutory function. And it was made up really of business, council, other executives, and was responsible in what was then the borough for huge success and investment, such as we know First Sight. So what I want to say is then roll on 2 years, then when there was no statutory function for a local strategic partnership, both for Adrian, the previous chief exec, and myself, felt there was a real gap in the partnership working and being in touch with our people again and volunteers at that local level. So 2012 saw the emergence of what is One Colchester as the Health and Wellbeing Board, because again, cast your minds back in that Colchester then didn't want a formal Health and Wellbeing Board. And the benefits of working in this way was that it has very limited investment required to operate. And it really is a coalition of the willing, of a lot of executives working at that strategic level, which is really important. And the other thing that we recognised was none of us can solve the causes of the causes alone. It takes a multidisciplinary team to do that. And most of the causes of the causes around health and wellbeing is 20% clinical. The rest is around jobs, education, housing, and feeling safe in your own environment. So if we could move on to the next slide. The operational governance framework is about those high-level conversations. It has a delivery board that operates a platform of delivery agencies, and it can be at times made up of about 150 groups. This does remain agile and can stand up and down task groups, and I'm sure you'll ask us about that overnight, which we have done in the past. And our COVID response back in 2020 is a great example of what we did. It can also be really transparent at getting funding, and holding the governance and the ring around any funding. And it does that in an asset-based community development way, and includes our people. Can we move the slides on, please? The relationship that we've got with the strategic board and the delivery board is absolutely a golden thread through everything that we do, and is really important. And it links back to things like Essex Partnership Boards, Children and Health and Wellbeing. We know we've also got the Safer Colchester. The strategic board remains accountable and holds the ring on the funding, and is the ultimate decision-making area. The delivery board are what we call the troops, the boots on the ground. They're responsive, fleet of foot, and they tackle the big issues, which we will hear more about later. We could move the slides on, please. I think we often say, why do we operate in this way? My question is, why would we not operate in this way? It's a dispersed leadership model, which has got great governance wrapped around it. It's also being held up as an exemplar now in the work that we do around a multidisciplinary team that understands and inputs into the shared values of our place. We base the delivery model on asset mapping and gap analysis insight. So we don't parachute programs in as scattergun or do unto our people. We really do go with what our insight and intelligence tells us. We remain agile, hyper-local, at getting the resources into the most need, working in an integrated neighbourhood model approach. So I'm going to hand over to some colleagues, if we move the slides on, please. They're going to talk to you more about the delivery board model and then the funding model.
Thank you. So the One Colchester Delivery Board membership is drawn across the sector, and really it facilitates that opportunity for partners to collaborate. So as Tracy said, we've got over 150 partners currently on that board. It allows us to kind of gather insight, intelligence on strengths and needs of the residents in the city to inform kind of cross-sectional working. We're able to kind of implement kind of like projects and support on areas where if needed, for example, including the cost of living, including winter. We have projects also that we're working on, including place-based social action, so the dementia work that we've been doing as well. The commitments of the One Culture Delivery Board is to connect people with their communities and help them to build on their capacity through collaboration and using that ABCD model as well. So making sure that we are working together in a way that works for them as well. The next slide. So the next slide just really wanted to kind of demonstrate a little bit more about the One Colchester Hub and our close kind of relationships and working with partners. So during the last year, we've provided extended kind of opening hours, evenings and weekends, so that we can provide kind of warm, welcoming spaces to those people in the community that are needing them. And this has all come back through the One Culture Delivery Board, as in these are things that have been needed in, in the community. So we've had 60 new partners collaborating with us in our seasonal work, including Nepalese Society, East Light, a Ukrainian support group. And during this time, we've also kind of the hours that have been used to support people in the community has been 4,650 hours. That was from April 2022. So we just wanted to highlight some of the key things that we're able to do within our hub space and the partners that we're able to work with. So the next slide, please, just shows us some of the high level achievements that we've had this year. So establishing the One Colchester funding panel, which Lou is going to talk about in a moment. Ensuring that all our members are integrated into the development of the Integrated Care Board, coordinating working with partners on the community supermarket. So this is a really key project that we're working on at the moment, is in thinking about how we're engaging with the community about what their needs are, and using that ABCD model again. God, my words out. And also other topics as well, so thinking about climate change, the town deal, the workforce. So in that whole partnership, we're able to bring together and discuss all topics that are really, really important to the city. And I think that moves us on to next slide. So the One Colchester funding panel. So the aim of the funding panel is to provide the governance and strategic direction for all the funds being held under One Colchester. We currently have this year £1.72 million being held by Community 360 and Colchester City Council. The idea of the funding panel is to really sort of maximise the opportunities that are within the funding that's within the panel, bring in other organisations that can support with match funding. We also look at promoting the opportunities system-wide to engage with as many organisations as we can across Colchester. Again, the ABCD model, looking at hyper-local funding as well as funding for sort of bigger organisations and really working at a neighbourhoods level. And the panel also reviews the monitoring of all funding, so all of the funders that have had the funds, and we look to understand their sort of future funding strategies and how we can support them to sort of work better and stronger in the future together. Next slide, please.
Okay, so I think I'm picking this one up. So the Community Safety Delivery Board is another board that sits under the partnership. And for those of you that can remember, back in 1998, I think it was, the Crime and Disorder Act brought in a statutory responsibility for community safety partnerships to be set up. And the premise there was that no single agency can deal with or be responsible for the complexities around safety issues. And again, with the overall themes and ideas around One Colchester, certainly the Community Safety Delivery Board and the Safety Partnership, which sits in as part of One Colchester, involves all the same partners. So it's required by law, and it has a few things that the Community Safety Partnership has to do. Not many things that it has to do by law. So it has to meet regularly. It has to agree priorities that have to be focused on. It needs to share information and develop a plan and monitor progress. And it also commissions domestic violence homicide reviews. So they're the statutory functions, but locally we go much further than that with our partnership. Local areas really can decide how they want to set it up, and we did used to have a separate we used to call it Safe Colchester Partnership, but a number of years ago we looked around the table and actually it was all the same strategic people going to various different meetings and actually talking about very similar things at the different meetings, because community safety is often about health and well-being and health. It's often about safety in communities, and it's often about the economy. So when you look at the nighttime economy, for example, so it made sense to align them, bring them together. And then the delivery board, which, as with the One Colchester Delivery Board, the Community Safety Delivery Board is absolutely integral to getting things done and making things happen. So it's all about a safer place. And how we do it is all about collaborating and sharing information, getting the right people together, learning and supporting each other, all about relationships, and really sharing and working collaboratively. And I'll hand over to Colin now, who's going to give you some examples of that.
Okay, so this slide shows the priorities for the safety partnership. Priority 1, tackling organised crime, gangs, county lines with an emphasis on drug trafficking. Priority 2, driving down antisocial behaviour and violent crime in public, focusing on hate crime and the possession of weapons. Priority 3, identifying and supporting victims of domestic abuse, sexual offences, and focusing on reducing the violence against women and girls. Real focus for us now. I've put up there the force plan because I wanted to see how that ties in with what Essex Police are doing. And obviously you can see with the priorities there are 11 priorities, which is our real main focus about reducing harm within our community. And they range from rape and sexual offences, domestic abuse, drug and alcohol driven violence, child abuse and exploitation, violence against women and girls, hate crime, burglary and robbery, serious and organised crime, deaths and serious injury on the roads. Now there's more deaths on our roads than there are homicides. So again, it's about reducing those. and the impact that it has on family, on the communities, etc. Stalking and harassment, and then business fraud and cybercrime has been recently introduced. Around the outside, you've got that sort of the golden circle, and a big focus now is on preventing things from happening in the first place. Early identification. And with that, that again ties in with the community safety partnership, where things get raised at a local level. If we spot them early, we can put interventions as partners to stop it escalating to a greater, more harmful level. And that also links into the Essex crime prevention strategy, which is not just about police preventing crime, but all partners and also volunteers and other agencies. As detailed on the right side of the force plan is our main efforts. So victims are put at the centre of everything we do. Violence, again, in all forms, and especially, as I mentioned, about violence against women and girls. So obviously Colchester has a huge nighttime economy community, so very different to the daytime community. And it's about bringing other partners in, the licensees, the licence officers from both the local authority and Essex Police, about how we tackle that and support our businesses going forward, making it a safe environment. The SOS bus that's in the town and deployed, supporting our community that want to go out and enjoy themselves, but do it in a safe way. Moving on to the next slide, please. So a couple of, I say a couple, that everything the police does has an operation name. So forgive the name. So OpKern, Op Make Safe is a test purchasing operation which focused on retailers, also focused on hotels, licensees, premises, clubs and nightclubs. This was in response to concerns around the exploitation of some of our young children. Going into businesses and trying to book hotel rooms, utilising our support from our police cadets, trying to basically educate these businesses about stopping harm, identifying and stopping harm going forward. We worked with the local authority safeguarding lead so that if any businesses failed, we can then give an input as an organisation, not just Essex Police. This is about a package of awareness so they can spot these early signs and know what to do if it happens. So if someone comes in and wants to book a room and they've just got that little nagging concern, who do they report it to? How is it raised? Rather than just sweeping it under the carpet, we can then get involved. We can then intercept these young children at risk and obviously provide that intervention. Op Jaguar and Op Sled, so that started up at the university, and that was focusing on violence against women and girls. That was a multi-agency operation, including specialist officers from crime and public protection, and also disruptive effects officers who were doing patrols with the security up at the university and during Threshers Week, where they're educating people and raising awareness about violence against women and girls. We worked with the licensing officers up there and obviously the bars, etc. Put on a host of engagements, conducted joint patrols, and that reduced crime reporting for that period. We then parachuted that operation into the town centre for the Christmas nighttime economy, where we know there's going to be increased footfall. Again, working with the SOS bus, working with street pastors, and again, these specialist officers, and working with the licensees, because ultimately it's about making that community safer, increases their trade and reduces the fear of going out on a night time in Colchester. We want people to come into the city centre. Op Grip is focused on nighttime on knife patrols and reducing knife attacks or bladed weapons, and obviously is one of the priorities where we're looking at possessions of weapons, and this is data led. So the analysts will put together some hotspot areas, and we have 4 of them in Colchester where we do dedicated high visibility patrols, not just by police officers, but again, security up at the campus can do them. And it's about reducing that fear and opportunity for crime to occur. And then pop-up police station, again, working closely with Community 360. We utilised their premises in the centre of the city, and we were able to deploy officers who worked and based themselves deploying from there during the run-up to Christmas, where we knew there would be increased retail footfall. So not only did that provide additional reassurance for visitors to the city centre, but the shoppers, but also the businesses themselves, the retailers, reducing the fear of crime and just working together with obviously Colbert, which is the culture against retail crime, but also the CCTV operators, and just bringing it all close and within the city centre. And then finally, the PSPO was brought in by the city council, but that provides Essex Police with additional powers now to deal with nuisance vehicles, and that's district wide. So it wasn't just centred on the city, but also other outlying areas that were suffering with vehicle nuisance. We can actually bring this tactic in.
Next slide. And then just, I won't go through this in any detail. I think you get the sense that there's lots going on, lots of things that hopefully making a difference. The only thing I will add is that we do a range of campaigns, and certainly the See Safer was again nighttime economy campaign that was very successful and picked up across the whole of Essex. And also, I think the other point I would make is that around funding, again, when you apply for funding as a partnership, you're much more likely to be successful in this day and age when you go for funding as an individual organisation. Indeed, on many occasions, you can only go for it if you're working in partnership. So again, some very successful funding applications, both from the Safe Colchester partnership, but also One Colchester as a whole. And then the final slide.
So the last slide we wanted to end on was a case study that demonstrates the relationships that have been fostered under the One Colchester Delivery Board and how it contributes to the outcomes of our residents of Colchester.
That's all from us. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Yes, certainly. Nitpicking, a matter of terminology, within the City Council, the definition of the city is all the land that is within the administrative area of Colchester. We don't use the term city to indicate just the urban area. So it can get a bit confusing at times when we talk about nighttime policing of the city. I think in the urban area in the middle, the high stress area, not out in Tiptree and Mersey, but just that we don't misunderstand. I have one or two questions to start off with. Tracy, you said that this was the natural way of doing things with dispersed leadership. What are the alternatives? Have you considered the alternatives? And particularly, how dispersed can the leadership get? Because when one has 150 organisations which are in partnership to some extent between sort of 1% and 100%, it gives the impression of being just a little unwieldy. So while it might be the natural way of doing things, have you tested doing it other ways? Are there any alternative structures which could be used, and would they be more effective and efficient?
So I think when we say about the dispersed leadership, that's more from the strategic board, which you've got 18, 20 chief execs on there, which enables us to walk in each other's shoes and stand in for each other. Because as you know, in the current situation that we're in, there's a huge amount of meetings that we're attending. And I can say, I can pick up the phone to Laura, colleagues from Essex County Council, vice versa, and we can brief each other to stand in at various meetings, and as does Pam and myself. So when we're talking about the dispersed leadership bit, that works very well. When we're talking about the 150 groups that are part of One Colchester, that's from a delivery, agile, on the ground, boots on the ground perspective. I think also when we're saying, is there a different way to deliver this? One Colchester wasn't in the format that it currently is. We delivered it in a different way back in 2012. We didn't have as many multidisciplinary teams involved. It was a tighter network. So I think we have tried and tested different ways of working, and this has organically turned into what it is today through the willing really of the other partners that are in the room. And as we've said, no one agency can do this alone. So we have also worked in separate agencies, in sovereign agencies, and we know that that doesn't work, but together we're strong, and we can work in a much more efficient and effective way for the people that we serve.
I mean, have you considered though your structure shows effectively a top level board and then two organisations underneath it. The Community Safety Delivery Board, which we have scrutinised in detail fairly recently, is sort of split off. Now, could that model be extended? I mean, where you have sort of 4 or 5 different boards. I know from your point of view as chairman, it might be more difficult, but would the effectiveness of the overall partnership be enhanced if there was greater granularity of the organisations that were consulting and working together? Has that been tested? And how sure are you that the current organisation is the one and only organisation that can deliver, and is the one organisation which delivers the partnership in the most effective and efficient way?
So I think from this perspective and what you're saying, it's probably not only for me to answer that as chair of One Colchester. I think the proof is in how the other agencies interact and want this One Colchester and the delivery boards underneath to operate. So I'm happy to bring in any other partners to mention. Do you want to come in, Lucy, or how we operate?
So there is the Community Safety Delivery Board, but there is also the One Colchester Delivery Board. So it's slightly confusing. There's a strategic board, and then there's 2 boards that sit under it. And the One Colchester Board picks up health and wellbeing element. So it is a subgroup in the same way that the community safety is a subgroup. And I think you're right. The reason that exists is because actually it's much easier to get business done through a subgroup. There's different people involved. There's also, you'll notice there was a working group on tackling racism, and various different subgroups at different times have splintered off to do specific task and finish bits of work for the main strategic board. So that board commissions out work to different subgroups and the delivery board, if that helps. And again, as Tracy said, that sort of evolved, that way of working over time.
Yeah, okay, so you're saying that in fact it isn't just straightforward 2 delivery boards, that there is a more flexible approach, that you are putting together teams to optimize your activity and your efficiency as and when it's needed. Yeah, okay, so right, thank you. The next question I have is that this is not just a synchronization partnership where you're talking to each other to ensure that you don't duplicate or fall over each other, but it actually has funds which are held within the partnership. Can you explain how the funds are held, accounted for, carries out the audit? Because there are no funds attached to the paper that we have, and it's sort of just one sentence which says £1.5 million is held within the partnership.
So in respect of the funds that are held under One Colchester, the actual how we got to this place was with an agreement that we would behave and act in a partnership approach. So most of the funds that are held within One Colchester are within Community 360's bank account. They are audited by the audit team at Community 360. but we decided for transparency and visibility that any funds that came in for the voluntary sector and hyperlocal funding to be dispersed out into the community, we would want to share in a transparent and visible way through One Colchester, which meant that Community 360's board doesn't have the ownership to say where those funds go, that actually if we're truly going to act in a partnership approach, that the funding panel that sits within the governance of One Colchester, which is again made up of many partners, Essex County, City, voluntary sector, some businesses, get a say on actually where does the money get dispersed to benefit the people in the communities of Colchester. So that's why we operate in that way. We also have that opportunity, as Lucy said, because we operate in a collaborative partnership approach, which many funders are looking towards now. We've been able to demonstrate that we were able to take on some place-based partnership money through the lottery for a dementia-friendly Colchester. And that was 3 years ago, and we've just been extended a further 3 years because of the exemplar way that One Colchester works.
I think that's a model which we're quite used to, because the City Council is the responsible financial authority for the town deal money, where it's the same sort of model that the organisation which decides how it should be spent is not the organisation which actually holds it in its bank accounts. So we're happy with that. But just pursuing that, so how are the funds associated with the partnership shown in the 360 accounts? I mean, do you separate in the accounts those monies which are being held or processed for the partnership, and are a separate set of accounts produced for the partnership to show what funds have come in, how it has been dispersed to the various subgroups and activity groups like the refugees, Ukrainians, and so on, which you mentioned in your report? I mean, is there an accountancy document which explains money's in, money's out, so that we would be in a position to understand how you are exercising your responsible management authority in regard to the partnership?
Yes, so we hold about probably 28 different funds at the moment, from small amounts of £500 up to large amounts of 300,000. We do have restricted funds, that's what they would be called in the accountancy terms. So all of our accounts that don't necessarily, I mean, they do belong to 360, but we choose to put them in a partnership approach. So yes, they belong, they're in our bank account, they're a restricted fund, and they're audited as restricted funds. And at any time with the funding panel, they're discussed and transparent within the funding panel domain.
Yeah, I think most of us are aware to a certain extent on how charity fundings work and the accounts that accompany them. But that I'm still not quite sure whether there are a set of accounts for the partnership as distinct from accounts for 360.
So there's not a set of accounts for One Colchester as such, because it isn't an organisation in its own domain. It's held within a restricted fund within our charity. That's nice and clear. There is a spreadsheet, yes, there is a spreadsheet with all of the funds within it that the funding panel and then the strategic board take responsibility for. So yes, it all separate out. It's very visible, it's very transparent, but it sits as a restricted fund within Community 360.
Is it possible for us to see that? Or is it a part of your sort of, only your trustees are permitted to see that? Because it does seem that many of the city activities are in a particularly sensitive area are being carried out using the accountancy base of an entirely different organisation. And I personally would certainly like to see how the partnership operates financially.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's completely transparent, open book accounting. So absolutely.
that is most reassuring, and presumably the clerk will be able to circulate that to us in the fullness of time. Colleagues, Councillor, sorry, who was first? Councillor Lilly, you've got your hand up.
I thought I'll get him first.
A millisecond before Councillor Smith.
I'll get him first so you can shoot me down in flames, as you always do every meeting. But I'm not paranoid at all. It's great to have you guys on board, and it's good to hear the great work you're still doing. I think that the One Cultural Partnership we had to pull together for the covert response, and it worked so well that it had expanded and even kept, and as previous portfolio holder, I used to see on some of those meetings, and even on the smaller group ones, which was where all the people got together, and it was the way it works is fantastic. I think that the funds that you have, when the groups get together, if they have a great idea coming along, then funds can be made available for that group to go ahead out there and do things with it. So I think that where the accounts are, it will show up on that group's accounts rather than the other way around as a donation to get going. And it's fantastic that you're still going after all this time. It's brilliant. The one thing I did want to speak about was, as always, that everybody's in there and they're working together, but it's the work that needs to be done around mental health. And Lucy will remember that it is a bugbear of mine then, and it still is, because we haven't really moved forward at all with anywhere dealing with the issues around mental health in Colchester. We're still pretty high up in there. We're doing brilliantly amongst everybody else that we try to do. But the issue is mental health. My short stay in hospital saw firsthand how mental health is failing in this town. But whereas the hospital has represented on One Cultural Support and health wellbeing, we never seem to have anybody that comes along from the mental health unit to answer these questions. We're still here talking about the knock-on effect that has on everybody. Ourselves in dealing with at a street level, where you got beggars, you got people who are homeless because of their mental health issues. We've got the police who get a call every time someone goes missing up at the hospital because of lack of action from them. So it's really big knock-on effect where the One Culture Board is doing all the work for them, but I've yet to see the mental health team, the people in charge, come along to a scrutiny board like this to answer questions from us. Why is the suicide rate so high in Colchester compared to around Essex? I think we're probably third, something like that. And I know that you've done work on the past, but that's the question. Where are we? We deal with on the street level. Why aren't they helping us deal with it even better by getting their house in order?
So I'm happy to pick that up in the first instance, and I don't want to presume, but I don't know if it's anything Laura wants to pick up in a moment, but a couple of things on where we are with One Colchester. And I think the great input that we've now got with EPUT that we didn't have before, which is the mental health organisation, for those that are not sure, is that they've also recognised the way that we work in One Colchester. And so what they've done is we have Minds Crisis Cafe in the One Colchester hub, which operates 7 days a week. But EPUT have now come to us to say, we're looking at the way you're operating on the ground in an integrated neighbourhood team way. Could we come and talk to you about seconding staff into Community 360 through the One Colchester footprint into the One Colchester hub? And we've just been given some funding for discharge mental health work as well, and transport to their homes when they've had to stay in hospital through some mental health issues. But I think that you're right, there's not enough. It's always an issue, it's an ongoing issue. We can drill down now with the asset mapping work into the postcode areas of the most referrals that we get through our social prescribing teams, and what we do about that. But I think that we are starting to make you know, some ground with them. So I don't know, Flora, if there's anything you want to add to that around mental health, but yeah, it is always an issue for us.
Thank you, Tracy. And I agree. I mean, from an alliance perspective, so the alliance, as you'll be aware, was the former clinical commissioning group, which finished in the summer of last year and then moved into a place-based partnership covering both Tendring and Colchester. And within our remit of place-based partnership working, we of course address mental health and suicide prevention as two of our you know, main priorities at place, because we recognise through the evidence, as you say, rates of suicide within Colchester and in Tendring are amongst the highest in Essex and actually in the country. And we're working very closely with the Essex Suicide Prevention Board, taking an approach through their lead to address the national priorities and the strategy, but then bringing them back through the Alliance. And of course, Tracy and 360 colleagues, as well as colleagues from Colchester City Council, are part of that and are integral to our plans around how we address the rates of suicide within Colchester. In terms of mental health, it's an all-age approach to mental health, so including children and young people and their families and carers, because we recognise that that's a significant issue or becoming further of an issue, and you'll be aware of that as well. So the support that we provide across place, including schools and education, is of vital importance to us. I think the role of One Colchester in this space is to take the strategic direction that we have as a place-based partnership and then to deliver through the One Colchester partnership. And he put R around the table, and I think the way we will address mental health more and more, as Tracy's already said, is through the integrated neighbourhood team approach, which in a way is around the multi-agency model that we're developing and is already up and running in a number of places within Colchester and Tendring, but it is our ambition to be able to accelerate the delivery of those over the next year so that all of Colchester and all of Tendring is covered, so that we can really work together on the ground in our communities with our residents to address the issues that they're facing, which of course does include mental health. So we recognise we've got more work to do, but we will be delivering over the next year. Thank you.
Can I clarify in terms of actions what that means?
So the multi-agency model that we're developing at the moment, and actually is led by one of our directors at EPUT actually, is very much focused on the multi-agency approach, addressing issues that are raised at place. So within the neighbourhood model, there are 3 areas of Colchester and there are 3 areas of Tendring. And it really is a multidisciplinary approach, as Tracy's already talked about, where different partner organisations contribute a resource to address issues that are raised within a specific neighbourhood. That would be very dependent on place, and again, by evidence, that may well be mental health, but it may be something around housing, it could be something around community safety. It's very much dependent on the issues that are coming up. And the team at place will be agile enough to respond to the needs as they arise. It may be well that you'd like us to come back and talk to you further about that model as it's developing, because as I say, it's not up and running and covering the whole of the area at the moment in time, but it is our ambition to make sure that those teams are up and running by this time next year.
So there is no additional no additional activity which the partnership needs to be asked to undertake. The work that you are carrying out from the strategic side will automatically deliver an improved approach to mental health and suicide within a year. That's not what you're saying. Can you clarify what you're saying? Sorry if I misunderstood it.
So I wouldn't suggest we would be able to address those issues in a year. What I'm saying is that through the alliance work and the work of the One Colchester partnership, which are two separate things but interconnected, we will be in a position where we are addressing those issues and working towards better outcomes in those two domain areas.
So when will the partnership be in a position to deliver those services and have a significant effect on reducing the suicide rate and generally improving the mental health issues within the city of Colchester? When is that likely to happen?
So we are already delivering against those two issues. So we are doing a huge amount of work within mental health, as we've already said, through our Feel Well domain and through the work of One Colchester. And the Essex Suicide Prevention Board has the strategic oversight of how we address suicide across Essex. One of the things that we are doing to support the Essex Suicide Prevention Board is now is around supporting them to deliver at place, not just through the alliance, but also through the partnership. We know that the evidence says that these things need a system and partnership response, and they do take time. And I wouldn't be able to talk in detail around the Essex Suicide Prevention Board, because that's a separate board from the one that we're talking about today.
Councillor Lilly, does that satisfy you?
It does. That you're actually talking about it, but when you look into it, I've looked at it in great detail, and people contact me over the last couple of years about people who have lost people to suicide. The one of the boards you're talking about was, I believe, just recently reprimanded. Well, because somebody was reprimanded that they didn't do a very good job in somebody who had committed suicide, and that it could have been prevented. The one issue we had and always have done over the years, the one partnership, we asked for the facts and the figures behind the suicide rates in Colchester. Who was doing it? What age group was it? How can we all look at it as a group? Target that group? Is it ex-soldiers? Is it ex-students? But it wasn't anybody apparently. But we've never had the figures from the mental health people themselves, so that if we do have or if you have the figures, then the One Colchester board could actually look at it and move towards doing it. The one thing I'm really frightened of, and I think, Chair, this is probably an item where I could actually apply to you for the board for this to come back actually in the future, and I think there's a lot more detail here we're doing. The one issue I am worried about, and it has happened in the past, I know that the police commissioner has put some more money into mental health for police commanders to try and sort out. But what we don't want to see, and it has happened in the past, that people with mental health issues are actually diverted into the criminal side of their behaviour caused by mental health issues, and they end up in a court, in a prison, rather than in an actual mental health unit. That has happened in the past. So I'd like to hear more about it, and I think probably not for tonight, because it's great that you are looking into and doing some stuff, but I think that it needs looking into a bit more depth for us if we're all going to help people get better in Colchester. But I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you very much.
Well, clearly, Councillor Lilly, it's not something we want to leave there. The sort of action that would seem obvious is that you haven't seen the data. You're raising the issue. The data should be evidenced, and the partnership should have an opportunity to see that data and explain to us how it is tackling what is a very serious social issue. I mean, is that if we move towards a recommendation later on along those lines, would that be acceptable way of moving? Then we get a report back from the partnership at some time in the future, expressing a view on the data and how the position can be improved.
Oh yes, I totally agree with you. But Lucy and and the rest of the guys on board, they'll turn around and say that they're not getting the data back from the mental health units. And that is the crux of the matter. You can't take action against helping people if you don't know which people to help. But the one people who should be helping are not helping. Everybody else is there. We're all geared up, 150 groups, got the people involved. All we need now is some data involved, so that we can target that and get that suicide rate down. So
I'd be happy to pick this up with the chair of the Suicide Prevention Board for Essex, who would be able to support sharing some of that information about their specific plans. So I'd be happy to take that forward and speak to the chair who oversees that group.
I think we'll note that down as a recommendation to consider in a few moments, and that would be the data goes to the partnership, and the partnership then at some time in the future comes back and explains the issue to us. I think that's the proper way of doing this, rather than us setting up our own alternative means of processing. Anything else immediately, Councillor Lilly?
oh well, we're starting. No, I think it works well, and I have got some interest to declare. Neighbourhood Watch, I'm a coordinator for that, and also a community speed watcher person. Myself and Dave Harris are the dynamic two of self Colchester, but and we have been joined recently by the police in joining us, and we want their cameras now, so because they've got lasers on them. So
Good. Your record of public service is exemplary, Councillor Lilly. Can we move on to Councillor Smith?
Thank you. A couple of quick points. The first one is, you in your achievements, you've mentioned double the available budget. I would like to have some ideas as to where you're getting all this extra money from, and basically who is funding it. So the serious question is, where is the money coming from? And the second thing is, you work at a very local level. How granular is your detailed data? Do you go down to ward level, super output level, or whatever?
So in respect of the funding, we are in a fortunate position because of the partnership that the Integrated Care Board have brought money into the partnership on the Live Well domains. So the Start Well, Be Well, Die Well. So all that domain funding has been brought into the partnership. We were also successful, I think I mentioned earlier, with the lottery around place-based social action around dementia-friendly Colchester and what that's brought to the partnership. But I think some of the success factors is as partners have seen the governance working well and transparency and hyper-local funding going out to the groups, more organisations have, if they've got partnership money, have brought that to the One Colchester to say, could we put local delivery pilot money there that then can be cascaded out really quickly on the ground, as we did with COVID. And so that's where the growth bit is. Will we see that every year? Don't know, probably not, as things start to tighten. But I like to be optimistic all the time around the ability for One Colchester to behave in this way. And then the second part of the question, which is how granular can we go? With the work that we're doing, we go right down to ward level now. With the asset mapping, and I think we presented the asset mapping probably a year ago, and that was really down to postcode level of what the referrals were coming in from social prescribers, etc. So we knew there was a high instance of mental health coming through from the Grinstead ward, learning difficulties in the central ward. So we can go down to that level.
Right. Could I press on that? Because I don't think that is local enough. If you take Councillor Sunnock's ward, for example, it goes from Dedham to Great Tay. Across the entire ward, you might get a fairly average picture, but there may be particular issues in one village that's not been picked up. In my own ward, St John's and St Anne's, we have a railway line with very, very different demographics on either side of that railway line. And I'm concerned that if you're only going to a ward level, Newtown and Christchurch is another ward that has the same duopoly of being heavily divided, that you'll miss areas of deprivation and need if you're only looking at ward level, because you won't pick up, particularly in some of the very large wards, like, for example, Rural North.
So apologies. We do go down to postcode level. I thought I had said postcode level.
I wasn't sure when you said postcode level, how many digits of the postcode you were referring to.
So,
Could you be?
Sorry, any of the referrals that we get through, that is a person-centred approach. So we get any referrals through any asset mapping, it's around a person-centred approach. So it can be at village level, it can be street level, that information is available.
Right. So when you're making your decisions on where you're targeting it, are you looking at a 6-digit postcode and saying there's a particular preference in this area, or are you looking at a 3-digit postcode and saying there's a problem in this one? I'm struggling a little bit to find, when you talk about hyper local, exactly what you mean by that. So I'm trying to understand that concept. How hyper is hyper local?
So again, I think that depends on the agencies that are recording the data. So I can say from my organisation's perspective, it's 6-digit postcode and beyond. I'm not sure about the Safer Colchester partnership, whether you go right down to that postcode level. What police data? Police data. Yeah.
So ward and neighbourhood for police data, postcode level, but actually, as you say, some of the organisations that come in, it will be about an individual. So if we go back to the neighbourhood model, these are about individuals and individual families. Through COVID, they were literally individuals, so that we were getting data from the doctor's surgery around individuals that needed help, and we were going out and supporting those individuals. So it really is at all levels.
Councillor Scordis.
Thank you, Chair. What I'd be interested in is quite an open, honest discussion is how do you think your relationship is with the council, and what do you think could improve? What could we do better as a council to support your work as One Colchester?
Wow, there's an opportunity. How far do I go? Okay, so in respect of the relationship with the council, I think it's better than ever. I've been around a long time, 30 years in Community 360, not in this role. I've seen lots of iterations of how we organise ourselves over the last 30 years. And I would say that the partnership working, walking in each other's shoes, having that relationship is excellent. What could we do better? I think that we, as a partnership, as a council, and we're all guilty of this, is to look beyond our own sovereign agencies sometimes. I think sometimes we think that we're going to solve the issues within our own organisation. So therefore, if some additionality or some additional funding comes in, we think, oh, we'll pop an officer in there, or we'll do this here. I think if anything, and we are getting better at this all the time, so we've got roles that are spread across various agencies rather than just one sovereign agency. So I think if we can get better at anything, it would probably be that for me. Get really down into that community, share job roles, walk in each other's shoes, and fund from different organisations across the piece. I don't know if any colleagues want to add to that, but that's where I see that benefiting.
So my role is already in that space. So I'm jointly accountable to the NHS, Colchester City Council, Tendrington Council and Essex County Council. So within place, we're already there's a lot of bosses. So we're already in that space around definitely thinking around how we jointly work together through those joint roles. But as Tracy said, also through how our teams come together, because we do feel there's something around understanding what each other's, you know, how we do things, who's doing what, and actually where we can strengthen those to deliver for our residents. Thank you.
Okay. The leader of the council wishes to ask a question. David, can you come forward?
Thank you, Chair, very much for the indulgence. I just wanted, I've listened to the conversation and thank you for the challenge and the response. But if you bear with me, given the entree of the last exchange, very good question. I just want to sort of say, I think there's really something important for us about saying how unique this is, how you and we collectively are ahead of many counterparts. And then that has, and we haven't touched on this tonight, this has some really beneficial effects. The first is that given that this example of great partnership working, it's not to say we can't do it better. And thank you for saying, of course, you're a great example, you're here. And straddling hierarchies, we all know this, is an unusual and difficult thing. So there's going to be some awkwardness with it. But it allows us to bring a focus of resource in both people and talent and entree into organisations, which is extraordinarily difficult to achieve elsewhere. It's the only way, frankly, that you can often get through the side door is by using the people inside the organisations. And with that goes the prospects of resource in the financial sense, and then the opportunity to add an extra voice. And however clumsily we may work, and I think that was the points fairly made towards the beginning of this, you know, there is a matrix of complexity. The other side round of that is it's a matrix of opportunity. And I just wanted to sort of say from the council and an administrative, reflecting all of our views, perspective, this is a great new step because it is so different from what I've glimpsed from before. And it's for you, Chair, to make summing up remarks, but this is a point I want to bring out, that partnership working, the effect it has then on people and the effect it has on the next steps, because Colchester does extraordinarily well in a number of areas for the way we have to work in the modern world, which is to bid for money, to compete, to secure, and then to apply it well. And if those we have to deal with, the National Health Service is a great example, sees that this is where it can put resource successfully through its partners and then achieve results which change lives without clinical means, that's good for the bottom line for the nation, but it's really a great prospect, let's put it that way, for Colchester. One other thing, if you indulge me, Chair, is there was a point about pace as well. And I hear that also, complexity often can be a problem, but I've just had a couple of recent examples, one today, we're talking to Pam Donnelly about refugees, where a number of us are in a circle around the unacceptable ways in which those who have arrived in the city boundaries in the wider sense, Chair, are being handled, that calls are made very quickly when it matters and people are being drawn together to try and provide a response to what government is not so far able to do. So it's a bit of assurance and I hope that's helpful, but I want to offer my personal thanks as well.
Thank you, David. We thought you were going to actually deposit money on the table for the partnership there and then. You came up with such gusto and glee. Are there any further questions around the table? Can I ask one final question? The third aim, fully understand I think it's been answered, of your three aims. The first is promote and facilitate joint working, which clearly is going ahead at a pace superbly. The second is to encourage and empower citizens and communities to mobilise their assets, improve the quality of life. And yes, you can see that shining through. The third one is the third aim is the one that I have just a little difficulty with, to narrow the gap between the most deprived neighbourhoods and the rest of the borough. Are there any metrics on how well you're doing on this? I mean, has the gap narrowed? because some would say the gap has actually widened over the last 3 years, going the opposite direction to that which the partnership would want to see. So my parting question is the gap narrowing? If not, when? And if it is, by how much has it narrowed?
So again, excellent question. And the simple answer to that is no. Because the reason we've got that on there now is because of the cost of living crisis that we're currently finding ourselves in. So it becomes an aim of One Colchester to support the most vulnerable people and communities in all that we can do around shared prosperity, around levelling up, around anchor organisations, around ensuring that people get a living wage, and that we help them with volunteering into employment and all of those sorts of things. So I'm sorry to say no at this moment in time, but that's clearly why it's an aim for this organisation, for this group to take forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. No other questions, colleagues? Okay, let's just consider our position. Clearly, it was a very interesting presentation. There is a phenomenal amount of work going on. It would appear that it's very difficult to understand just how effective and efficient an organisation of this complexity is, as the leader was saying. It really is difficult. And whereas we'd love to have answers which would demonstrate to us, the council, that this is working at peak efficiency, I think we have to accept that we cannot drill down and actually get those assurances. The best we can get is that it is certainly doing the best job available, given the resources and the limitations that are there, and that is fine. We identified two issues where perhaps we need further information or activity. The first one was a wish to see the accounts of the partnership, if they can be disaggregated from 360, its principal provider. And on the matter of mental health, I think we were surprised. I guess we should have known that Colchester has one of the highest suicide rates. But given that, we do need to see the data, and we would ask the partnership to respond at some time with a briefing note if the answer is easy, with perhaps another quick session together if it's not easy, on how that issue would be tackled by the partnership, and what targets we would, we on behalf of the community would expect of the partnership. So those are the only two recommendations which have emerged during this evening's scrutiny of the organisation. So is it your wish that we record those two actions and put them into effect? So with that, can I thank you for attending this evening? It certainly is one of the great unknowns to me, just what does the partnership do? And I think the answer is, if you've got a partnership which is nimble and active, it's got some base core issues which it concentrates on, but it has to move with the times. If it's refugees, the position is refugees. If it's getting benefits out, it's getting benefits out. If it's getting COVID payments out, it's getting out. It's going to be dynamic and going to be changing what it does. And it's very difficult to scrutinise something which is changing all the time. All we can do is scrutinise the people, I think, and say, what an excellent team. Keep up the good work. Clearly you have it all under control. So can I thank you for this evening attending and exposing your organisation to us.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
The time is now 7:15, so with your permission, colleagues, I suggest we allow our guests to leave, and then we go straight into the scrutiny of the portfolio holder for planning and infrastructure, and then have a short break before we do the section 106 item. Is that agreed? Okay, colleagues, if we can recommence. We have Andrew online somewhere. I think still online. Goodo, goodo.
Yeah. Go on, check it on with Dennis.
Yep. Okay, we have we received from the clerk the detailed delegation of your responsibilities for planning and infrastructure. So do you just want to address a few words on the main topics? Because clearly you have the biggest and most important project, well, in my opinion, the biggest and most important project that the city has at the moment. Do tell us all about it.
Yes, I'm obviously not going to be able to cover everything that's in my portfolio, but thanks for the opportunity to come talk to you tonight. I also, before I get into the detail, I wanted to thank the team that I'm working with. They've actually made this portfolio a whole lot more enjoyable than I ever thought it could be. They're a great group of people. They've worked hard during challenging times, lots of regular briefings, and obviously keep answering my persistent, constant stream of questions, which must be challenging for them. What I won't be covering is housing strategy, housing standards, development control, Building Safety Act duties, because these are mostly national policy led. Although I've done my best to, get up to speed and understand them all, there's no way I can compete with the expertise of our officers and their statutory provisions that they're cracking on with. And the only time I get involved is if they're under resourced in terms of staffing levels, which, at the moment I think they're coping. But as you say, probably I believe the most important thing in my portfolio is the local plan, which we've made significant progress over the last few months. Obviously, it's within my portfolio, but I'm also on the joint committee, so I'll kind of share those two roles into one report. There's been a large body of evidence that's been assembled. We've done significant work on the master planning, and thanks again to the officers for doing this. We're working with two other partners that I believe have a slightly different perspective to us, and I've tried to champion the Colchester priorities, and I possibly have earned the title of being critical friend from Colchester colleagues, and maybe something more derogatory from Tendering and Essex. But I wanted to make it clear tonight that I am committed to delivering a gardening community, but nothing short of that. I've held people's feet to the fire, and it's because under the remit of my portfolio is to safeguard the principles that Colchester Council signed up to, and those that we promised the public that we are currently in a slightly tense situation. That being the delivery of the link road, which I think is key to sustainability, deliverability, viability, and for the entire development. I won't go to the specifics of what I think the concerns are, but in order to be able to get behind where we're at the moment, I'm working with other colleagues and officers, but I think we need to be able to cap the numbers of houses that can be built before the entire link road is up and running. We've got the MMU, which is progress, but it's not legally binding. And I think also there are some unknowns in terms of viability, which I think we need to look at in terms of phase one, which covers obviously our local plan period. I think, without those reassurances, the impact on Colchester infrastructure, especially congestion and air pollution, will be devastating and create massive problems that I don't think any of our councillors would be happy to accept. And I'm concerned, and I do vary with opinion with officers on this, but I am concerned that I think Colchester will lose any control once this DPD is in place, because of the nature of the joint committee being, we've only got 1/3 of the votes. I mean, that's an arguable point. I've offered my opinion. It's not the same as others. But currently, if I can't get reassurances on some of the outstanding questions I have, I'm not going to be able to support the vote to take to DPD, though I would really like to. People think I've been in opposition to this. I have been in the past, but I'm wearing a different hat now, and that is to get this built and to do it to the best of our abilities, and I'm completely committed to that. I just wanted to make that point. On to something less contentious, planning policy. Obviously we've adopted section 2, which is good news. That sort of makes us all feel a bit safer in terms of speculative development, and I'm really encouraged to see massive progress on neighbourhood plans. This is a passion for me. As a ward councillor, we've just had our neighbourhood plan severely tested, and it's shone through. Local tiny little baby policy has been accepted by the planning inspector and has been upheld, and I think it's a massive result. Tiptree are in exactly the same position. They hadn't even adopted their plan, and yet they've had appeals decisions in their favour because of them, which is really encouraging, because it not only means that we're progressing them at pace, but government are recognising that. I think that comes out very clearly in the proposed changes to the MPPF, which I'll go on to later. But there's lots of progress. I'd go into the details, but it will take too long. Supplementary planning documents, we have adopted the affordable housing SPD, sorry, a bit dyslexic. The biodiversity one is out for consultation, and we're progressing the climate change, sustainability, active travel, shopfront design, and Colchester Centre master plan as well. We've also adopted a statement of community involvement, which is always good to have in place. I think it's a legal thing as well. The infrastructure audit, the initial work for the infrastructure audit has started. I think this is a really important project, and I give credit to my predecessor, Andrew Ellis, and totally supported him when he was looking into this with officers, and now taking it forward. I'm encouraged by the fact that he's still involved. We have two separate, and I don't like this particularly, we have two separate sort of wings to it. One is Team Colchester that looks at the commercial and acquisition side, and then there's the more sort of straightforward master planning side. Again, both of those groups have got cross-party involvement, which has been really valuable. The reason why I think it's so important is because we will start reviewing our local plan soon, and in that call for sites, if we can't determine whether those are deliverable sites because of where there are shortfalls in infrastructure, they might seep into sustainability appraisals that are completely pointless. I think it also, because of the changes to the MPPF, we know we've got a huge infrastructure deficit. It runs into the billions across Essex, but as an example, I've been reading section 1 again, and section 1 talks about planning numbers across the whole of the borough, and it kind of almost assumes that we would get funding for the A120 dualling. We thought RIS 3 was in the bag, and it's not. And that is such an important strategic road. And yet we haven't got any commitment for that. And that really affects any development that we put into Colchester. And I think we need to be putting back to government, these constraints are real. And they will affect how we go on to determine our numbers if they can't be addressed. But I also think, on a local level, and you're going to go on to 106, but the way 106 works is you can't go retrospectively. But if we don't know what's missing via this infrastructure audit, then we can't front load any of those 106 agreements. And again, my favourite subject, neighbourhood plans. Neighbourhood plans can pick those up, but they're on such a micro scale, and we can't influence greater stuff. So I think that audit is very important, and I'm really pleased that we're making some progress on it. Planning appeals, I've briefly mentioned the one in Tiptree, and there was one in Wivenhoe, and both were determined in favour of neighbourhood plans, which is great news. Enforcement performance, I won't go into all the statistics, but we are doing really. We are up there. There was something Lindsay sent to me today. Basically we're outperforming most people. Obviously, we are probably going to become a victim of our own success, because the public will hear about how well we're doing, and we'll get loads of more enforcement stuff in. And we have a limited team who are doing a fantastic job. But I'm not really keen to go into any of the details of any of the cases that I get involved with, simply because obviously they're very contentious and they involve members of the public that will probably not enjoy it being discussed at scrutiny tonight. I won't go to 106 because you can do it next. NSIP, nationally significant infrastructure projects. This has been a complete revelation to me. There are things like the A1, the A12, and also the National Grid East Anglia Greening Project. Now the A12, I have tried to get up to speed on this, but I am supported by Simon Carnes, who is a fabulous guy when it comes to policy. I think he should go and retire and write poetry, because he writes about some of the biodiversity stuff in poetry, in my opinion, and he's done a fantastic job in supporting the individual requests of, like, the wards that are affected, and trying to put in whatever mitigation possible. But obviously that project is bigger, and Essex have a different part to play in it, so we've not necessarily done all of the work, but we have replied to the consultations. The greening project is about to go into another round of non-statutory pre-application consultation. We will obviously feed into this one as we fed into any other one, but the possibly, and I don't want to get too excited about it, good news is that National Grid have decided to pick up and pay for an independent review of the offshore solution. Now, the problem with the offshore solution is clearly it's the only way to go. I mean, it's just ridiculous that anything else has even been consulted on. But it's kind of a little bit messed up by national policy, and I haven't got the actual bits and pieces, but basically National Grid can always get round doing offshore stuff. So although we will respond in the most robust way and say we want this, and if you're going to do anything alternative, here's 100,000 reasons why it's a bad idea. Actually, what we need to change is national policy, and that is about us lobbying our MPs and trying to get national policy changed. And I think it's a dual effort, but we are working hard to represent the views of ward councillors and the general view of this council, which is the same as everywhere in East Anglia, which is we don't want your dirty, ugly pylons. Thanks very much. Royal Town Planning Institute Awards, couldn't go past without mentioning Karen Surratt and Becca Jones receiving awards at that. That's something to shout about, and we're very proud that their work has been recognised. But significant national consultations. Obviously, I've mentioned the NPPF. I've been to various cinemas. seminars on this, and it's really fascinating because some of them have been very developer led, and they hate all of the changes, and they're really grumpy, and they say they're too vague and this, that and the other, and it's going to really harm building. And then I've been to other ones where they're led by the policy writers and have invited local authorities and councillors and officers, and they're incredibly buoyant and optimistic. It's not perfect, but I do think it's a step in the right direction. Obviously, this has been talked about at local plan. I've also fed into what we wanted to respond to the consultation. I don't know any of the dates and when that comes, but I think, you know, it's a reason to be optimistic in terms of planning. I think it's moving in the right direction. City centre regeneration as part of the master planning. As I explained earlier, it's got kind of two halves to it, which are annoying for me, but I'm told that they're there for you know, governance reasons, and obviously if you're doing the planning, you don't want to be doing the buying and selling the commercial side, so that's the reason for the split. So we are at a situation now, I haven't seen it, and it's imminent that I will see the consultation that will go out on the master planning. If you remember, this is another project, got to give credit to Andrew for, but the idea is, on the back of the town deal funding and the Luff bid, we've got a massive pot of money which kind of dictates some of the things we have to do with this. But what it does is it looks at a more holistic view of the whole town centre and says, you know, here's a load of public realm money that we can spend, but let's talk to Essex about how they're going to implement their, you know, new cycle and walking strategies, the bus networks, how that can link between stations and bus stations, and trying to make people move around Colchester better. But also there's been an awful lot of public consultation on this, and some of the stuff the public have come up with is really positive and helpful, and other stuff probably makes our life a lot harder, but we have at least gone out and looked at it. So that consultation will go out soon. It will form the policy around the work that will take place. And as I said, the public realm stuff will go ahead because we've got the funding for it, but there is still some acquisition work and partnership working with Essex to see, you know, what we can do on a larger scale. But a lot of that stuff is still very secret because it involves acquisitions. So I can't tell you anything. Transport strategy, this list goes on forever, and I'm really happy to share it with people, but we are doing some really good stuff. We're doing some stuff with Essex. One slightly controversial one is the subway on Crouch Street, which I think has been well rehearsed in council meetings, and I'm wholly supportive of those people that think getting rid of the subway is a bad idea. But Essex have gone back and done additional consultation on that. That closed today, I believe. And then there's some really brilliant stuff that we've been working on, things like bike storage and cycle paths and all sorts of really groovy stuff, which we really need to get in the public domain. But the list is just massive, so I won't go into it tonight. But there's a lot of stuff there that if you want me to, I'm really happy to pass on to councillors or take questions tonight or offload to officers who know it much better than I do. And that's the end.
Thank you very much. That's a wide-ranging presentation of your portfolio. Turning to councillors, can I just remind us what the objective is this evening? We are scrutinising the portfolio holder and what the portfolio holder has personally brought to the table and the projects. We're not looking at in detail at the projects. It's the projects in relation to the portfolio holder. So with that, Councillor Smith, would you care to lead off?
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Andrew, for that very detailed presentation. I know this has been a very difficult year for you personally, and I think everyone will be impressed at your knowledge and commitment to the portfolio and the work that you've done. What's particularly impressed me is the way in which you've worked on delivering the tendering culture to borders communities which is, I know, a project that you and I have had words with in the past, and not necessarily on the same way, but your ability to explain clearly the difficult and often complex procedures to councillors is something that I've greatly valued. So I would like to commend you very much for the excellent job that I think you've done on this portfolio. And I'm not going to try and ask any tricky questions because I know you know your portfolio far better than I do. So I'm not going to try that one. But I would just like to say, I think you've done a first-class job on this portfolio. And I think the presentation that you've given to councillors this evening shows clearly you've covered the whole depth of the portfolio, not just the 1 or 2 star points. So I will leave it at that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Yeah, I'm in a similar position. One of the great things that I might say about the portfolio holder, Andrea, is that you've told us everything we want to know before we actually ask the questions. I mean, there have been so many briefings which you've organised for us on enforcement, on Section 106, on the tendering borders projects, that whereas some of the portfolio holders tend to be a bit on the invisible side, if that isn't unfair criticism, you have been at the forefront, not only giving your own views, but ensuring that through the formalised structure of briefings of our democratic services, we've all been kept up to date with your thinking and where you are leading on this particular range of subjects which have been allocated to you. So great stuff. Councillor Lissimore next.
Thank you, and many thanks to Andrea for her very prompt response to me for an email I sent to her this afternoon. So thank you for that. I would like to ask her on her views on the garden community principles. Now, I've done many moons ago, I was the cabinet member at a county which included planning. And we did sort of site visits to garden communities where the garden community's principles of the uplifted value of the land paid for the infrastructure to be put in place had happened and had happened extremely well. And in fact, one particular place that I went to had a church and a school and trees and sewers and drains and roads, but actually no houses. However, in the last few weeks, I've become very concerned about the blurring of those garden community principles, particularly when we're talking about the new road and the garden community in Colchester near the university. So I wondered if you could just give us some of your views on how strictly you believe the garden community principles are being kept to.
There are the town and country planning garden community principles, and there is a separate set of garden community principles that we came up with via the NEGC partnership, which I felt already watered them down. So I'll focus on what the town and country planning stuff is. I could go for the whole list and tell you whether I think we have or we haven't conformed to them. But the most important one you've already mentioned is the capture of the land value uplift. Now, you know, obviously many moons ago we were working on a different scale and everybody got quite excited about setting up a delivery corporation. Now, I had my reservations about it, not because I didn't think it was the right thing to do, but because I didn't think we would be able to do it. And unfortunately, I've been proved right. And I think that was the way that we would maintain control, you know, because we don't own the land. We can't, we will be beholden to a developer. And, you know, one of my concerns, which I shared with your colleagues sat next to you, is the fact that, you know, we were asking 2 or 3 months ago, can we get the 106 negotiations started? Now, I've had a private meeting with Latimer that said, you know, is massive. They don't necessarily have the experience of doing it, but they would happily pay for us to go out to an independent organisation that has the capacity to do this at this scale. And I think that is, you know, fundamentally to me, where I'm really wobbly. Where we've got it right are, not trying to be rude, but the things that are much cheaper and easier to deliver. So they're things like 15-minute neighborhoods, walking and cycling infrastructure, all the stuff that as part of a new build, it would be ridiculous not to include. But we've absolutely covered that in policy. So, you know, I do believe that everybody is committed to garden community principles, but I think on various and the most important levels, I can't be reassured that we're actually going to deliver against them. And you know, I hate to be in conflict with others on it, but that's what my view.
Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, I'd like to say that I think Andrea is a splendid portfolio holder, and I find her she understands the technical planning side, but she also brings a voice of business common sense and commerce to it. It's just common sense. And I do think that on a lot of the planning stuff, we see the planning going ahead and no one thinking about how the delivery works. And on the garden communities, we saw that certainly at the inspection, the inspector got that point, and she really got that, and she really has looked into the land value uplift. I distributed before this meeting, I distributed a portfolio report that she did to all members of the committee. I hope you got it. It came in an email this afternoon, expressing some very significant concerns about the decisions we've got to make next week. And I guess the question here, as we're looking at the person and not the policy so much, is whether she feels she's, you know, obviously got contrary views to some and some officers, whether she thinks she's getting the objective support from officers she should be getting, and whether she's at ease with having a much, or put it another way, how she thinks we could resolve the risks that are coming our way with this next step we're about to take.
On the first point, I think, you know, as far as the support I need from our officers, I'm getting it. I think the conflict comes in here with the fact that ECC have identified a problem. They've asked Homes England for additional money to meet the shortfall in the overspend and to look at the timescales, because, you know, obviously COVID had a massive impact onto delivery timescales. Homes England have agreed to an extension at the time, but what they have categorically said was, no, we're not going to pick up the shortfall. And the way that Essex has resolved that is by saying, well, we'll deliver the road up to Allen Farm. Now, you know, if that was happening in the timescale from now until 2026, when we're starting to deliver homes, that wouldn't bother me in the slightest. That's the right way to have done it. But I do think, and I've gone into it details, the problems with the land acquisition and the junction, the A120, I can't see solutions. And I've asked our officers questions, and they've passed them back to Essex, and I'm just not getting that now. Getting responses that reassure me. I think, you know, some of it I've been told is commercially sensitive. I totally accept that, but, you know, I'm a big girl. I can sign something that says I won't tell the public. I think the problem is we were never party to the first contract, HIF contract we signed. I think very, very few people, even Ian Vipon, didn't get to see that. And now we're signing another contract, and we don't even have any detail on what that includes. And that's, I think, where my issues come in. And I sort of briefly covered what I think we need for us in terms of reassurance, and that is, one, there is a capped the amount of capped the amount of homes that can be sold before the completion of the link road. And I think the HIF funding originally said the dead weight was 1,000, but I've been told that the traffic modelling has been redone, and that possibly has changed. Now, I don't see how, when you're talking about a strategic road, when people have stopped using public transport over COVID, that number could have exceeded 1,000. But you know, that's an area that I just can't get the information I need on. And then the other outstanding thing is how we deal. There's one particular landowner. I do not want to go into details, but I just think we're going to have problems. And there's a cost implication to that, because everybody's got a price, and obviously that's not being shared, but that will have an impact on viability, because it'll have to be picked up by Latimer if Essex walk away from that, which I think is possibly the smartest thing they'll do. And then the other one is the issues that Highways England have got with joining the A120. Way back in 21, when the planning application went in, we were told that they had some issues on safety grounds. I'm sure they're surmountable, but I would have thought there would be an amendment to the planning application in order to resolve them, and I've not seen one. So it's another area. I can't ask my officers because they they can ask the questions, but they don't know the answers. So I think, you know, there's a question mark about viability, which I think you could probably answer better than I could, William. And the other one is capping the numbers of houses that are built before we have a full link road.
Yes, I can see that that members of the committee are not there's a lot of mobile phone ticking going on. Does the portfolio holder feel that we've got this huge development, our biggest development, right on the edge of the town? Does she feel we're losing control? I mean, my opinion on it's quite clear that we have to get as much of this agreed as we possibly can before we lose control. And is this shared with other members of her own group and of the administration? Because it's the whole thing is really perplexing that we are storming ahead here, and we seem to be almost sleepwalking. People don't seem to be aware that we're handing over so much to a party we don't control. And this story of the link road is exactly the type of thing that we might have worried about when we agreed to that joint committee. We suddenly are the ones who bear the brunt of the demand for infrastructure, and if it's not delivered, we're the ones who'll suffer. And we don't seem to have somehow been able to get that point across to our partners in tendering and Essex County Council.
I think we're getting very close to discussing the project rather than the portfolio holders performance. But if you have any comments, if we can turn that into a question rather than a statement, is there a response?
I do feel we're losing control. It's not necessarily a view that officers share, and I think that needs more explanation, and I think it would be covered. I hope it's be covered. I haven't read it all. I've been so busy with other things. The frequently asked questions. I don't. David has already said he is happy to accept that we're not unanimous as a cabinet, and my views are shared with some of my group, but I haven't discussed it outside of my group.
It's your personal give to the project that we're really trying to tease out at the moment, and how you think and where you are leading the city in these areas. Any more questions, Councillor Sunnox? Oh, you're happy. Colleagues on the panel, any more questions? I have, if I can just move on to a different area completely. One of the things which perplexes me is the transport strategy in the borough, particularly the public transport. As an aside, I represent a ward where in Lexton they complain they have too many buses, and as soon as you get out to Oldham, 8 Ash Green, Great Tay, and so on, they complain they have no buses. So it's a very patchy subject, and I wonder whether we could hear your views on where you would like to take the city in regard to improving the public transport, and what strategy you have in mind?
Okay, I think as in partnership with Essex, we are looking at the town centre as part of the master planning deal, and that's really valuable work. And that's not just public transport; it's also active travel across it. And obviously, as part of the town deal, some of those public transport routes are being extended out to places like Grinstead. And then obviously, as part of the garden community, you've got the RTS feeding into that. But I mean, the RTS is one route from the east to Cuckoo Farm. It doesn't help any of the outside of the town centre wards. And I'm terribly sympathetic with rural north. Wivenhoe has a particularly good bus service that has really suffered through COVID. It was exceptional. We would have 4 buses an hour plus 1 train an hour, so we were very well served and used it a lot. But we are suffering now because buses are being cut. I can't imagine how awful it is for places like Tiptree and Mersey and rural north, where you just don't have a bus service at all. And I think that is something that's significantly missing. And I don't know how to resolve it. If I had a magic wand, I would come up with whatever money it took to actually make those a realistic option for people. Otherwise, we have got to carry on catering for people using the cars. We will do anyway, but I think if the modal shift aspirations is to get people out of their cars, and they've recognised that the garden community will need a 10-minute bus service, how do they then expect somebody coming from a already established community to cope with something so far below that standard? So I think it's a bigger project than just Colchester. I do think it needs addressing, but on a micro scale, trying to sort out the town centre is being looked at. But I don't have a solution for you other than that I think it's an issue. One of the things I could say to you is it's taken 8 weeks, I think, to get a response for First about the fact that their service is getting worse and not better, and yet they're receiving all sorts of government grants that they shouldn't be receiving because they're not hitting their targets. They're not. I think they had to be at 80% people back using buses before they could get the grant, and they're nothing near that, but they're taking the money. So I have asked for a face-to-face meeting with them, but as we all know, trying to deal with a private contractor is not that easy. And then on the flip side of that, you've got something like the RTS that currently runs the Colchester one. It's still making a loss, and we're reducing fares rather than increasing them. And certainly one issue for me on the garden community is the forward funding, the priming of the RTS to get it off the ground and running as a commercial thing. I fear that it'll be years before we ever get that actually to be self-financing. And I think the same problem would exist with some of the outstanding rural wards, that if they're not financially viable, then you won't get a private company touch them, because why would they?
Yeah, given that answer, we've not seen you campaigning for an integrated transport authority in North Essex, which would give you the right to take a much greater control over these areas. Do you have a view on whether that is a matter that you would like to campaign?
I'd love to. I think it's a pretty terrifying prospect to be responsible for all that, and I'd like to shift a few things out of my portfolio if we ever did do it. But it sounds a really interesting prospect. I think the relationship between us and Essex has improved, and I think the master planning has been a very good example of how that partnership can work. But I still have my frustrations with how we could take it on, and then we could start talking about potholes and roads, and we'll be here forever, won't we? But yes, I mean, let's talk about it offline, Dennis, because I think that sounds a really exciting prospect. I just didn't think it was in my remit to do so. Sorry.
And my final question, moving down your list to the next item, your responsibility for city council owned highways. I'm told there's some really rotten highways on some of the old municipal council estates about which nothing has been done for years, although I did see that 1 or 2 were being selectively upgraded. Do you have an overall strategy for ensuring that those roads owned by the city council are brought up to a standard of which the citizens can be proud?
This is a tricky one for me because actually transit roads do come into my portfolio, but I've actually got nothing to do with the local highways panel, although I should do. And therefore my influence on this area has been really small to date. So I can't honestly answer that question for you, I'm afraid.
Are there any more questions, colleagues? Sorry, yes, Councillor Lilly, yes, you were on the list.
How could you ever forgive me? And especially when I'm about to praise up county council, which is a rare occurrence. The £2 initiative on the buses is actually a brilliant idea, and I use it all the time. But I can't use it to get to Row Edge because the bus services in the rural area is every hour now, and luckily my cousin lives near the bus stop in Row Edge, so I'll pop in for a cup of tea and wait for it to turn up eventually. But I think the first I've missed a point here. The county have introduced the £2 rise, and you can get, if you live in Beerchurch or Highwoods, it's a fantastic bus service. There's a bus every 10 minutes going there backwards and forwards that way, and £2 is a brilliant initiative. But if I want to get to the rural areas, you forget about it. It's too unreliable. So the question is really that we need our own bus service again. I know it goes back to the 70s and the corporation buses and such, but it does make us wonder where we are and whether we ever will look into doing that. But good on the county council for doing the £2 thing. It's a very good idea. But we first have missed the boat, so to speak, on this one, because they should have put more buses on and promoted the £2 one, because I'm sure that if we have more buses from the rural areas, knowing that £2 into town was a really good deal, better than using a car. But I don't suppose they even spoke to the portfolio holder in Colchester, but maybe one day we dream of a bus service that will serve the people.
Andre, can we hear your views on this and where you want to take the council, given the public demand for the discounted service?
The discounted service is not news to me, but I'm not sure whether I heard it via just picking it up on rumour, whether I was briefed about it. I don't want to put I don't want to put the blame anywhere for me not knowing that, except on my own door. But I do think something radical needs to change, and I quite like Councillor Liz's idea that we take this service off first. I mean, there are bus services that make a lot of money, otherwise they wouldn't be doing it. So, we need to have a bigger conversation, and we do need to engage them. And I'm struggling with that at the moment. But, if there's some sort of threat that we could turn around and say, well, actually, we're buying a whole new fleet to do this, we're going to, kick you out of the town centre. There are lots of incentives that we could use to make those relationships work better. And I think, added to that, I think there's also a revolution that is coming, which is obviously the green buses, which means battery operated stuff. The operation is different. We'll need to consider where they charge up and stuff. And we're not quite there viability wise to be able to do that, but that will change things. And it could be at that point that we introduce a whole new fleet, because we'll make that investment ahead of a private company and then nick their nick their commercial services from them if they don't want to compete with us or work with us. But I don't have a bigger solution except to say I think, you know, it needs a wider debate with a, you know, a group of people, and maybe it's a project that falls out of the master planning, that we need to look at a borough-wide public transport system that, you know, caters for everybody and not just the town centre.
Thank you. Excellent answer. Any further questions, colleagues? I think the portfolio holder shows an extremely good and able grasp of her portfolio. Clearly, there's the odd political disagreement around the table about what's going on, but what we're judging is the quality of management of the portfolio on behalf of the city, and certainly at a personal level, I'm absolutely satisfied with the performance of the portfolio holder, and I have no recommendations to make to cabinet or anyone. And I wonder whether colleagues feel that that view is shared around the table.
I think we should compliment the portfolio holder. I think that we've seen today one of the best report backs that we've had for a portfolio who, let's face it, is in her first year of having the portfolio, has shown an amazing grasp of what is an extremely complex subject.
Yes, I would certainly accept that, and we resolve to send our thanks to the portfolio holder and congratulate her on the precision with which she has addressed the issues in her portfolio.
Thank you.
Okay. Shall we have a 7-minute break? I'm sorry, Andrew, you wanted to.
I just wanted to say thank you. I was expecting a really good kick in, and I feel almost robbed.
No, people only get kicked when they deserve to be kicked, and that is not the case here. Can we thank you for your presentation, and also the briefings that you've arranged for us over the years. It really has been splendid, and helped councillors to understand what's happening, where we're going. Even if we don't always agree with it, at least we know, which is the important thing. Thank you very much for linking in with us this evening. Okay, break for 7 minutes, and then we're we? We're on the air. Good. Okay, take your seats. We're now on item 12, review of the section 106 developer contributions. This was an item brought to us under agenda item 9 principles by Councillor Sunnock some long time ago, and eventually appears on the order paper.
Sorry, just a technical matter there. It was brought to the committee by Councillor Sunnock, as you say, but formally it was moved by Councillor Smith. See, he's indicating.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Thank you. I believe at that time Councillor Sunnock was not actually on the committee, so could not raise it at that meeting, would have to raise it a subsequent one. So I raised it effectively on his behalf. But,
and I was extremely grateful.
You could do so orally in the absence of a written
absolutely. So
yes,
technically
it was raised by yes. Okay. I retract everything that I said on that. This was brought to us by a section 9A recommendation from Councillor Smith, done magnificently with lots of gusto. The report is to be presented to us by Karen Syret.
Thank you. And unfortunately, I'll apologise at the start because the report hasn't covered everything that Councillor Sunnock did submit in a written paper, but I didn't see that till late today. So what the report does do is it intends to cover some of the issues and topics involved in what's quite a complex subject around 106, involving the collection and spend of developer contributions, otherwise known as Section 106 agreements or planning obligations, planning gap, and all sorts of terms it's been known as. There is a lot of background involved, which is summarised in the report and includes legislation, national guidance, national policy, local policy and local guidance in the form of supplementary planning documents. So just to highlight, there's a lot of information there. I think what's of primary importance is to mention the 3 statutory tests, which are requirements when applying any Section 106 request and indeed spend. So planning obligations can only be used if they're necessary to make a development acceptable in planning terms. So an easy example would be improvements to a road junction. They're required to make an access safe to take the increased number of vehicles. An example that might not be quite straightforward is a request for tree planting somewhere else away from the site that's being developed. It might be nice to have more trees planted, but it's not actually necessary to make the development proposed acceptable. The second test concerns the fact that the contribution must be directly related to the development that's funding it. So on-site provision is something, again, that's easily identified as being directly related to the scheme, whether that be affordable housing or a play area. It becomes less compliant if the play area is in the next village, for example. And then that's the sort of instance where we might get questioned by a developer. And then the third test is about any contribution being fairly and related in scale and kind to the development proposed. So we can't ask for a swimming pool, for an example, from the development of just 50 dwellings. Neither can we seek a playground or a contribution to a playground from a sheltered housing scheme. And they're extremes, but I wanted to just sort of give you some examples. Another important point to make is that we can't seek to address existing deficiencies through the use of Section 106. Section 106 should only be used to mitigate the new development that's proposed. And I think a good current example of this is the Warren Lane Malden Road junction, which I think most people would agree is in need of improvement, but there hasn't been funding go towards it despite a number of developments taking place in Stanway. And that's because although it might be seen as problematic, the developments themselves won't have much of an impact on the use of that junction. From memory, the Five Ways Fruit Farm development, for example, I think maybe would result in an increase in 6% of use of that junction, which wasn't considered sufficient enough to require a contribution to upgrading. Another thing in national policy and guidance is the fact that we shouldn't use standard formulaic approaches to Section 106. Now, these often offer both us and developers some certainty around what they might expect to pay and what we might expect to achieve. But the national guidance is we shouldn't actually be doing that, because each Section 106 should be based solely on the site-specific circumstances and constraints that exist at the time. The report then moves away from the guidance and policy and talks briefly about permitted development and why Section 106 isn't attracted to that, and also some information around Essex County Council and contributions. But I appreciate there might be a need for some of that to be followed up in another session. There's also then a section which looks at a number of issues that have been identified over the past year or so, and some of which have already been improved. We've carried out an internal review of processes, and that was led in part by a project manager, and he identified the Planning Advisory Service papers as a good source to start and make those improvements. There's other suggestions for change which are in the process of being implemented and which are also detailed in the paper. Finally, there's a random 4 examples of Section 106 agreements and unilateral undertakings attached as appendices to the report. These show, rightly so, that there's no one size fits all to contributions and that they will vary from one site to another. And this goes back in effect to those 3 statutory tests that I mentioned at the start of the presentation. One thing that is often mentioned when we talk about Section 106 is the Community Infrastructure Levy, or CIL, and why we haven't implemented that. And you'll see in the report that I mentioned we did progress that, possibly back in the day when Mike was portfolio holder. We certainly did, but at the time it was not a particularly prosperous time for development. It had definitely slowed down, and in order to deliver policy compliant affordable housing requirements, we couldn't then implement community infrastructure levy per se, because that would take priority over delivery of affordable housing. There then followed a number of amendments to the community infrastructure levy by national government, and promises to overhaul the system, which currently works in tandem with Section 106. And we've now had another suggestion that this will be replaced by an infrastructure levy. And I think the initial thinking was that this will replace Section 106 and the community infrastructure levy. But we find out now that is not the intention. There will still be Section 106 and an infrastructure levy. There should be a consultation on this anytime soon, I went to a conference 2 weeks ago and someone from the department spoke about it, said it was expected at any time, which will be interesting. He also suggested it will be a complex process, which will be tested on pilot authorities in the first instance, rather than rolling it out nationally at the start, which is quite unusual. And it isn't expected to be tested with those pilots until 2025. So it's some way off, despite the consultation about to hit us. Finally, I should mention that there is an audit being undertaken of Section 106 related to the Stanway area. And it's important to note that any recommendations that come out of that audit will need to feed into changes to processes on top of anything that is already in the report. So I'm happy now to answer any questions that the panel might have, or try to anyway. Thank you.
Councillor Lilly.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. It's always an interest on 106 money, and when it works well, it works really well. On other roads, we've done extremely well out of the 106 money. We've got a massive new playground area worth about £75,000 paid for by the Wharf development down there, and that's thanks partially to the plans that were put in place by the parish council that we wanted. We know that when there's developers coming up, and if you already spend the money right up front, then it's a real big asset to the area that have to the developments in. When those other areas that don't have such things in place, they do tend to miss out, and the money seems to go elsewhere, which is annoying to people. And it does really work, and I think works better than the SIF funds. And Karen's right, we did look at it, because you have to. If you're going to get more money from a SIF initiative than the 106, then we should go along with that. But it wasn't the case to be, and they promised the government promised that it would be better, but it's not. I think it favours more the developer than anyone else. But the most annoying thing of the 106 money and planning, of course, is the financial report that they do, so that they can basically get out of it. If they show they don't make any profit from housing, you'll have to put up with the housing in your area. Again, no benefit for it whatsoever. But I believe it does work as it is now, and in certain areas. But it has happened that, for example, the Hive, look at how that's been neglected over the years. And when you hear about how 106 money was diverted to other projects, big scale projects in the town that it went to, and you suddenly wonder, how did that happen? Really should, if you're taking the housing in an area in your ward, then that 106 money should be spent in that ward. But if there's no one there to ask for it, then obviously then it's going to go elsewhere. I can't see any other schemes that are really going to benefit from it. If you remember do you remember the plan application that we had? That was the Army one down Flagstaff Road, that was built on the old clothes textile place that the Army had. The massive building firm proved that they couldn't make any money out of that whatsoever, and they never paid one penny in 106 money in that. And to me, that is actually wrong. But I don't, no matter how many they tinker with it, I'm quite happy with the 106 money as it is at the moment. But you need to get your plans in place when you know that you've got development in your area to grab that money and spend it in your ward. Otherwise, the big guys at the Borough Council will spend it on other projects and disappear. But yeah, I'm happy with the 106 money going in.
Thank you, Councillor Lilly. Your presentation there does raise a series of questions which I think we should be drilling down into. First of all, are we spending all the 106 that we're entitled to, or is any of it leaking out of the system, not getting spent, or getting lost for other reasons? And clearly some of it will time out if projects are not there. But in effect, are we making the best of the opportunity of the 106 funds which are placed potentially before the planning system? The second question is, there are new proposals for approving projects so that we have a more orderly approach to what it is that can be funded. This is a good point. It's also difficult in that maybe in the case where councillors are seen to be perhaps hesitant about a planning application, yet at the same time, we're having to scour opinion to find out what we can spend the 106 on when the application which we're opposing effectively is actually approved. And while we can see how the system works, our residents sometimes find it a little difficult to understand. So the second question is, have we got the approval of projects, or the direction of travel we're going to approve projects for inclusion in the section 106 possibility basket? And the third issue, I think, which Karen's touched on, is the process for release of funds to ensure that it is done speedily, and again, we don't lose any money via complications with the agreement to allocate the funds to the projects. So those are the three questions which I had, and having read the report, I'm still not wholly sure I understand what the answers are, although it does tell me the direction of travel and the projects which are being undertaken to answer those three questions.
Thank you. And I think there was some overlap there, or some strength of feeling between what both of you said. So by answering one, I'll be answering both, I think, at the same time. So I think Mike started off by talking about the upfront identification of projects being important, and I think that's key. And I think that's key for a number of reasons, which I'll come on to in answering Councillor Willett's questions. We have already started to do more of this than we did in the past, both through the creation of the local infrastructure delivery plan, which is that list or table of projects that we're identifying, but also through local plan policies. And some of them in the existing local plan are better than others, because we have to remember we started that plan quite a long time ago, even if we didn't adopt it until more recently. But I always think the Laird Hay policy, for example, was a good one, because we worked on it with the ward councillor, with the parish council, and with the landowners. And so we included things like a rural exception site, which you can't actually include a policy for normally, but we thought of a way around that. I think we included some bungalows, and it's about trying to reflect local needs as well. And by doing it up front, then there's none of those surprises and none of that bad timing issue when you've got a planning application that your communities don't want, but you've got to say, well, on the off chance this gets approved, what do we want to secure from it? Because those projects are already identified up front, especially if it's a plan-led system. The local infrastructure delivery plan should certainly help address some of those issues. So, you know, we are reliant on yourselves sort of helping us to update that. In terms of spending money we receive, I would say yes, and certainly the ones that I have been involved in more recently, I could have probably spent 10 times over. I think increasingly people are wanting the same pot of money because there's so many things to spend it on because of the large infrastructure deficit that Andrea mentioned earlier. In the past, there's certainly been, don't know about money, but certainly land returned, because in that instance, it wasn't ours, it was land for a school, but that wasn't progressed in a timely manner, which was very regrettable. And it's that sort of thing that I think you learn from mistakes, don't you? So we try and implement as longer time periods for spend as possible, but that's one of the things that does get pushed back. I also think we are making the most of the money that we receive. And again, I think that local infrastructure delivery plan will help us do that as well, because there might be some sort of bigger ticket items, and rather than quickly spending 3,000 here or 5,000 there when it comes in, we might identify some projects that need a few developments to add up, but actually they're seen as a priority, so it's worth waiting and then spending on something bigger. So I think that will hopefully address your issues about making the best of what we receive. And then the final point was about the release of funds and how effective that process is. That's one of the things that we've started to implement some improvements, but I think there's still more to go. I certainly think we've got a more streamlined system now. Even the fact things are now added to SharePoint, so you know, the number of people that have to sign off the spend can be done much quicker than it was in the past. So that's one thing. And then having someone with overall responsibility for that spend, rather than people going off doing work which then has to be aborted, there'll be overall control and a strategic overview really of all things 106. So I hope that's helped.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I've got two questions. The first one is on Appendix 2. You've got the way in which projects released, and there is the agreement with ward councillors. Now, of course, Councillor Hogg, Councillor Chu and myself always agree on everything. But what would happen if you had a disagreement between councillors as to what priority there was, or indeed whether this is how the money should be spent, or whether it should be this play area that gets upgraded or that play area? How would you resolve that issue? And my second question is also to do with, I suppose, with how you resolve it in section 4.30. You talk about all the competing priorities, and there is a restriction on how much we could demand by the viability of the site. How do we assess that viability? Because I understand often we've used something called an open book method, and that's meant to ensure that a developer makes excess profits, we get extra things. So how do we measure that? And how much have we actually got extra from using the open book method in, say, the past 10 years?
Okay, so the first one around councillor involvement and how we resolve competing demands. The intention is those competing demands, which might be identified, will be identified at an early stage rather than when we get to the spend stage. Everyone can put forward projects. They will then be assessed in the first instance to see if they're still compliant. If they're still compliant, they can go on the list of projects, the LIDP. And then it comes down to your professional officer's advice when dealing with individual planning applications at the consultation stage to reflect what's in the LIDP and most appropriate for that scheme on a site-by-site basis. So if we take rural north, for example, we're going to have very different projects put forward in Dedham to Langham to how far across do you go? Yeah, Great Toe. So, you know, we have to be realistic about what development will fund what. And, you know, there's never going to be probably a system that resolves all competing demands. But, you know, this is seen to be the best way forward to doing that. And I can see you've got a follow-up question. So
I have, because what you're effectively saying is I think actually rural north would be a lot easier because the development was in Dedham. I'm guessing what Dedham's put for probably goes top of the list rather than Great Tay. But in my ward, for example, Councillor Hogg and I are having this discussion. We've each put in our proposals. They both passed all the tests. What it seems to be now is that an officer is deciding which one of these two proposals goes forward. But we'll assume there's only enough money for one of them. Is that the correct way of doing it? And if so, what sort of feedback is there being given so that I know that Councillor Hogg's preference was preferred due to perfectly good reasons, rather than the fact that, you know, his name comes higher in the alphabetical order than mine does.
thank you. You said there's not now that it's councillor involvement. This hasn't changed. Officers have always been responsible for identifying projects, whether that be the communities team, Essex County Highways, Parks and Recreation, and they submit all their projects in. Where we've slipped up is where in the past is where they haven't been project specific. So now we have to be project specific. So this shouldn't be so much of an issue anyway, because by the time it gets to that section 106, it's already written into the agreement how the money will be spent. There's also the opportunity for applications to go to committee. So then that can be discussed at committee if it's considered to be an inappropriate spend prior to determination. So there is that opportunity as well. And if we take your ward, for example, if there was a development, you know, it's similar type proposal for if we take the gasworks site, for example, in Bromley Road, then you know, if communities came forward and said we think an appropriate spend would be at is it the Oak Tree Centre on Harwich Road? Yeah.
Yes.
Then we would have to consider if that spend met the tests, not whether it's someone's pet project. If I'm being quite frank, that's what it boils down to. What is the most appropriate spend in accordance with those set criteria? So it's not really a judgment, it's applying tests. Oh, second question? Or...
Okay, well, the second one was how we share out the pot of viability and how we check that what a developer said is that I can't possibly afford this, and then house prices go up 20%, and mysteriously they still can't afford it, and they don't come back and say, despite us having an open book arrangement, they don't come back and say, hey, we've got some extra money. What one of these projects which you had to discount because of viability, you now want to spend the money on?
Yeah, it doesn't really happen now, if I'm being honest, because the local plan policy is quite precise, and we have the guidance as well, to local guidance to inform us. So the local plan policy now ensures that every site within that local plan is deliverable and developable, and the developers have to sign up to that, and that means that they agree that they are policy compliant. We've not had one allocation that hasn't delivered the full 30% affordable housing, for example. So we haven't had to go down an open book or a viability appraisal for quite some time, as far as I remember.
And when we did go down them, did we ever get any money out of an open book agreement?
I seem to recall they weren't the most successful of processes we've ever used. I'm sure Councillor Sunnings would be able to tell you where the numbers are hidden, but you know what numbers are like yourself. They can be used to say all sorts of things in different ways, can't they? There were instances where we went back and said, no, we don't agree with what you're saying here. We also wrote in some viability follow-ups, reviews. So on larger schemes, we would put in a review process so that we would test viability at a later stage, recognising that, you know, that when permission was granted, it might not have been the most appropriate time. But I think that was the prior local plan, rather than sites that are now in the adopted local plan. So I think there has been a change, and it's been brought about nationally, if I'm honest, because of a change in emphasis. We can't just allocate sites willy-nilly. We have to prove that they're viable up front. So they can't, you know, there's no squirming out of it later down the line.
So if we had a scenario where house prices suddenly went up and builders made lots more profits, there's no way we could go back to the viability and say, we want a bit more now. We just have to say, well done, builders, that's great profits you've made, so be it. If it goes down, presumably the builders say we can't afford to build, and we don't get the Section 106 developments because they never build anything. So am I right in thinking the builders have got a game of heads you win, tails I lose?
Well, fortunately, building in Colchester, some might not agree that it's fortunate, but hasn't really slowed down to the extent that it did in other authorities. So there were some negotiations that came back, some applications came back to renegotiate viability. Some of them, I think, resulted in more affordable housing because there was more money available for affordable housing. So that might have supplemented some of the other requirements. But that things like affordable housing tend to be big sums of money. And they're the ones that in the past have probably been the first one to be sort of looked into, and rather than provide policy compliance scheme, they've looked to either change the tenure or change the number of units being proposed. In terms of, you know, if the developer's profit goes up, I think they would say, and rightly so, they're taking a risk. They're a business, they're taking a risk. And therefore, you know, they might suffer because if they've paid that Section 106 up front and sales values go down, costs go up, then they lose out. And there are examples in Colchester where I've heard, but there hasn't been much or any profit at the end of the day because that scenario has happened. So, you know, there are winners and losers, aren't there, all the time. That is business. So you take a risk and you look to make benefits or benefit from it where you can.
Councillor Sunnings.
Yes, I mean, the simple question I want to ask is the process not for dividing up the money, but for collecting the money. But before I ask that, I just want to try and say why I brought this before the committee. And it wasn't to talk about how we divide it up. It was to talk about what I see as Colchester as a town that has taken a lot of development, more than anywhere else in Essex, and the infrastructure hasn't kept up. And this is an observation that is common amongst people in my ward. You know, do you go to Colchester? No, it's, you know, it's congested, there's problems here. And then I go to the thought, well, the land values, the development land values are really high. And why is it that there's those large amounts of uplift going to landowners? Remember, I'm a developer myself. I'm not against developers at all. I'm just saying that we're not getting this right. We're not capturing that uplift. And this Section 106 legislation is the tool that we can use to get it, or we could be doing it by self. But so my question is much bigger picture than what we've been talking about. I'm not talking about doing a village hall here or a leisure centre there. I'm talking about really big amounts of money, articulating what infrastructure we need and how we can raise the money to get it. And we'll know when we've been successful because building land values will be affected. And the reason why I'm so perturbed about it all is that it makes it impossible for the developers as well. When you're going along, you don't know what Section 106 you're going to have to pay. And and in the discussion, in the early discussion between landowner and developer, you know, that's a real issue. If we could see, if there was a clearer process, I think it would help both developer and the council and the community, because we get more, we get the facilities that we're falling behind on. So I go back to my original question, which is, what is the process for determining what infrastructure contributions collected? And I gave in my paper, which sadly got as far as the chairman of the committee, but didn't get. I should have sent it to Owen Howells and to Karen and other people, but I didn't. What I've done there is I've shown some examples of absolutely massive disparities. In the case of West Mersey, two sites right next door to each other with the same sort of requirements. One that the council didn't like, being charged 19,000 a dwelling, and one that the council was in the plan, and therefore the council did like, being charged about 5,000 a dwelling. And I've highlighted another one in Great Hawksley where the health contributions weren't collected in the first instance. Another one in Great Tay in my ward where there was no Essex County Council's fault, not our fault, but again, wildly inconsistent. There was no education contributions collected, and screams from the local school who are saying, the local primary school, saying that they're expanding and they need money. So, you know, where I'm going is that we need this to be orderly, and we need the question asked, how are we going about doing it in an orderly and fair way that facilitates development and infrastructure provision?
I think, well, several comments there really. The process for collecting money isn't quite as set out in your paper, but because I'm conscious not everyone's got that paper in front of them, then, you know, whilst I can go through it, it doesn't seem very fair to anyone listening online and members in the room that haven't got that in front of them. But the process is, it's a policy plan-led system. So developers don't submit their offer up front. They come in with a planning application and will expect to pay what the policy says they will contribute to. That is based on evidence, and it's based on information from statutory undertakers and from our partners such as Essex County Council. So for example, the West Mersey scheme, you know, one saw education contributions. That was an unallocated site. So that site hadn't been taken into account when we were looking at overall growth in the local plan. We knew we were planning for 920 new homes every year, and we identified the sites that would provide those homes. And we looked at infrastructure constraints when we did that. A scheme like East Road comes along where we didn't know that was on the horizon, and the county turned around and asked for £640,000 by the looks of it, which they hadn't asked for on the other scheme, because they hadn't been able to take it into account. So it goes back to that plan-led system, really. And, you know, I don't think anyone can dispute that there's an infrastructure deficit, and it's not just in Colchester, it's everywhere. And unfortunately, that is how the system, not just planning, you know, I didn't study taxation when I did a planning degree, because, you know, that isn't what planning is or should essentially be about. But we're being forced more and more into dealing with infrastructure deficits, not through a taxation, because, you know, no government has wanted to impose that sort of regime on developers and prevent house building. So we're being asked to deliver something when really we've got one hand tied behind our backs. It is very difficult, but we're starting from a point of deficit, and it's really hard to then address that deficit. When I said at the start of the presentation, Section 106 cannot address existing deficits. It can only mitigate the development for which it's linked. So a development of 19 dwellings, for example, county don't ask for anything towards schools. I think they're maybe 10, but maybe 20. But below a threshold, they don't ask for anything. Health authority don't ask for a contribution below a certain threshold. So all these things don't help even mitigate the developments that are being proposed. So, you know, there's other ways I think that we need to try and address some of the funding issues around delivery of infrastructure.
I mean, the difficulties of Section 106 and making it work are very well articulated. Particularly, I don't know where in the MPPF it says you can't take a formulaic approach, but there's a it's the PPG. Okay. One thing we can do is to push Essex to be more formulaic in their consultation, and we've spoken about that, and I hope that this committee would support that. I've certainly spoken to a developer about it, and they would support it too. So that would be one small thing. The second thing I draw from what we've been told is that, you know, I'm really not quite sure why we abandoned the sill. And I would think that we should get on that. If we could get our infrastructure deficit review in, it'd be a major piece of the evidence to get ahead with the infrastructure levy if and when it comes through, or if not, if it doesn't come through, go to a sort of SIL mechanism. So we're dealing with it on a bigger scale and not having this, what do you call it, when you're hypothecation of little amounts of money to little projects, which are causing so many administrative problems. You know, I'd hope that that would be on our agenda. The first step to doing it is the infrastructure deficit report, which then articulates it, and it would be the major piece of evidence for putting a SIL or infrastructure levy in place. And the last point I'd make is that this Section 106 infrastructure, or this legal framework, is exactly what we're using, and I'm sorry to repeat it again, on a grand scale for the garden community. So there we've got 340 million of infrastructure contributions that are assumed to be collected in the plan, and that's all been detailed and costed. That's cash contribution from the developer. And, you know, from what Karen has said, I'm worried about that being realistic to negotiate unless we put it absolutely in cast iron terms up front in the plan. And that is my biggest concern about the garden community. So I'm sorry if that's become a sort of rant instead of a question, but I really see this as a major area that we ought to be, as councillors, we ought to be digging into it. It needs to come back and back until we're really happy that we have a fair and an effective system.
So I think there was 3 points there. First of all, Essex County Council can't be formulaic if there's not an infrastructure constraint. So, for example, I think there's 3 primary schools in Tiptree. One has always had sufficient capacity, so they haven't been able to ask for a contribution, whether that be formulaic or not, towards primary education. And I think they've had spaces in the secondary school at Firstable. So they haven't been able to ask for a school contribution. So it's not always that straightforward, because that is the starting point. The development only needs section 106 if it can't be mitigated with existing infrastructure. And then in terms of progressing SIL, Andrea will probably be able to confirm offline. She attended a seminar only a few weeks ago and was advised not to progress SIL in light of the emerging proposals for the infrastructure levy. And I think that was from someone at the department. So we can double check that with her and with them. And then I don't really want to get into the garden community tonight again, but I would say that, you know, the policies are quite detailed in terms of detail for section 1, and then more detailed in the DPD about what infrastructure will be required, you know, primary school, secondary school, sports facilities, all that sort of thing. So I think there is a good level of detail there.
Back to Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. I get what Councillor Smith was saying. None of us, we've all watched and seen exactly about the infrastructure. They've all been frustrated at every planning application that certain things haven't been asked for. In fact, in the last few years, we've rejected or stopped an application, one in Mersey, for example, because we looked at it and there was no application by the county for facilities to improve the surgery down there. We all know it was going to need it, and it was on the recommendations. The county didn't ask for any contribution to the medical facilities down there, so we stopped the application and sent it back on the recommendation that it goes to highways. Have you forgotten to ask for this, or could you ask for it because we feel that it needs it? And I can't remember what happened. I think that they did come back with a contribution in that one, and it's the same with other applications that we have looked at, and they haven't asked for it, and we've asked them, but a couple of times we feel there's no need to ask for this. So it is frustrating that we can all see that, and we need that. It's like the ridiculous situation of roads adoption, and we all suffer for it. You get estates built, and then the roads are adopted 8 years later, far too late, because everybody's parked everywhere, and we suffer as councillors to do that. So I get where you're coming from. When we've tried our very best, they failed to ask for that, then we can't do much about it. But there are times where it can actually, when we have got things in place. For example, in Row Edge, there was some money allocated towards 106 money that was done. A scheme to improve a footpath came in. We wanted some money as ward councillors we wanted to use some of the 106 money to improve the footpath. Officers said no, because it's already been allocated to a canoe rack and so like that. So we were too organised in that respect. And going back to the SIL stuff, we go back to it and look at it. You must look at it, and if it's going to be better for Colchester, then you must grab it. But at the time, we used to go to seminars at the county council, and every other portfolio holder and officers around the county. At the moment, SIL is a developer's friend rather than a council or resident's friend. So there's no need to do that. So, and it will change in the future. If it's better, it's better. But we do ask for the infrastructure to be put in place. We do send the stuff back if it's not right. But if people don't ask for it, we don't get it, and we've suffered for it in the long term.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to look at what we can get out of this meeting, because I think there's a common desire for us to improve the amount of funding that we get from Section 106 agreements. I'm a little perplexed as to, is there a problem that we haven't got enough schemes coming forward to spend the money on, or are we finding that developers are too good at saying we can't afford it? Because I think Councillor Sykes makes a very good point that we will know this is successful when land values start coming down. So less of the profits go to the developers and more of the profit or the land value appreciation goes to the community in the form of assets. So I'm looking to see how we can improve that situation. And I don't know whether it's Councillor Sunnox or whether it will be Karen that could come up and tell us what we need to do to get more money out of developments.
Oh, sorry. Can I also ask, when that question is being answered, the local delivery or local infrastructure delivery coordination, the report says that is done at an officer level. Yet there is concern that the county council and other agencies are at times not being smart enough. Is there any proposal that we should be, or anything we should be putting in writing as a proposal to indicate that I think there is a worry that opportunities are being missed? Is the current arrangement for coordination really citywide focused, or is the work you're doing bringing in the coordination of everyone who can ask for Section 106 contributions?
Thank you. I think I jotted all those down, but if I miss anything, then please come back. Just starting with Mike, because he made a good point there actually about deferring a planning application, and we have used the lack of Section 106 agreement to refuse applications as well. It's fair to say at appeal we've had mixed results because inspectors are very reluctant to agree Section 106 unless it's very robustly evidence-based. And again, they won't apply that standard formula. Has to be very site-specific and project-based and meet those statutory tests for SIL compliance. And then there's the issue about how we improve spend collection, things like that. And I think that's William certainly might have views as well, but there's various pieces of work I think that will inform that going forward. First of all, there's the infrastructure deficit work which is underway, and that's at a city-wide level and will take in all partners and all statutory bodies. So we'll identify everything. And and then probably have to lie in a dark room because when we see the funding gap. But that's what that will do. We'll then, using that, we'll undertake viability work for the local plan to identify what infrastructure constraints actually constrain development, where they constrain development, and then what infrastructure needs to be funded to enable development to take place. And then at an even more detailed level, viability work for developments. So we don't, at local plan level, we don't look at one site in isolation, but we'll tend to group sites. So there might be, you know, areas of the city that are higher value than others. So there'll be a viability appraisal for those compared to other areas. So I think there's multiple areas of how we improve things going forward. There are instances where people don't have projects, and that again, through this LIDP, I'm hoping to alleviate, because we really put the focus on other services, plus parish councils and yourselves, to identify those projects. When someone mentions something, come to us. And then, you know, if we have to say, no, that planter is not necessary for that development to proceed, or for any development to proceed, then you will know up front. But what we might say is, but we do know the village hall roof needs repairing, and it's not addressing existing infrastructure, because we have to be clever. It will improve capacity of the village hall by allowing more people to use it. And then finally, the LIDP is at present, well, the LIDP is just Colchester City Council functions, unless there's some overlap. So where there might be mixed use of facilities, I'm thinking maybe community and health, then there might be multiple benefits there. But the work that I outlined, which, you know, Andrew, William have been involved in from the outset about the infrastructure audit, that will be much bigger and look citywide, bringing in all those other partners as well.
William.
Yes. So some things we're doing there, and certainly the infrastructure delivery plan, and these are all things that will add to the evidence. And as I say, it doesn't matter a fig whether it's called infrastructure levy or SIL, it's going to be the same evidence we need. And we seem to have been for years saying, oh, we won't do a SIL now because they're about to change it. We won't do a SIL. And every new house, I think it's been 16 housing ministers in 2 months or something, I've forgotten. But there's been a lot of housing ministers in and out, and they each seem to have their own approach to it, and then it changes. And we've, you know, we as Colchester need to solve this. So we know the direction of travel. We can do so much to get a list of that really well articulated case, which then feeds into the case for raising these funds. Obviously, it has to be, as you say, it has to be need, not taxation. But if we articulate the need better, then we can get better at the taxation. There's a few other things that you know, that Councillor Smith asked what can be done. Well, first of all, the game is this is not about developers, this is about the land value. And the game is that the developer comes along and says, oh, it's not directly related, and they're very, very good at that. And they've read exactly the wording of the PPG and the MPPF. And we need to get better at that game and push them a little bit harder, I would argue. The next thing is that we need to push them hard enough so that more are squealing that they can't afford it, and then they have the option under the guidance to produce a viability appraisal. And we need to get better at doing that. Sometimes the viability appraisal you decide completely up front, and then some others you leave with an open book and you have a review at the end. I don't particularly like that. I think it's up front that it should be done and nailed down. we shouldn't be bearing the development risk. We should be leaving it with, we should sort it out hard and clear up front. There's a few other things we can do. I feel, and Karen slightly surprised me tonight by saying that there's a rule saying you can't be formulaic about it. There is something called the Essex County Council Developers Guide, and that did, in section 5, have some pretty clear formulas. And over the years, those seem to have been diluted. And there's a version out for consultation at the moment that is waffle. I'm afraid. I hope no one records this. But it's a very lengthy document, shall we say? And there is a formulaic bit of it, and I'd like to see that firmed up and made clearer so everyone knows where they are. And if they won't do it, we should do our own. I do have to say that a lot of this is with Essex County Council, and we need to be pushing them. A lot of the big contributions are theirs, not our, we're only a sideshow on the spending side. We are absolutely centre stage though on the collection side, and also centre stage on the need for it to come here. So we need to get very smart about getting Essex County Council into gear. So I regard that consultation as really, really important. So I hope there's a few answers, Councillor Smith, there between what you've heard from officers and what I've suggested as to what we could be doing to improve things.
My final question is about an earlier statement from Karen. I'm not sure it was a colloquialism or whether it was a definitive statement where you said councillors can help update the infrastructure plan. Who will actually be responsible for maintaining an appropriate infrastructure plan? Will it be the ward councillors, the portfolio holder for planning, the local plan committee? So I feel that this is the absolute key to getting it right, having the list of projects which are appropriate to the potential developments. But if this is not overseen by member or member interests, I can see some difficulties downstream.
Yeah, I think that's useful comments actually, and I was thinking about it when you spoke about it, and I wonder whether, you know, you get monthly reports of money that's available. Yana sends out. I wonder if we attach the table to that every month, and then people can cast their eye over it and see if it still looks fit for purpose. Let us know. Then it's a prompt for you, because you know, I don't know what you're the same as me, but unless, you know, so many things going on, then don't necessarily think about it. But if you get something every month, it might prompt you to come back to us. I can see some nods. So
That's an excellent suggestion. That would certainly assuage my concerns. Now, colleagues, as a panel, do we have any views which we wish to document? And what we've learnt this evening is that the system is almost broken, and there have been lots of attempts by government with their SIL proposals ever changing to try and fix it so that it's fairer, swifter, raises more money, and gets people out of a hole. But that is beyond our control. I mean, implore government to come up with something before 2025, but we can't really do anything. And our resolution is not likely to make much difference at all. And we've heard about the process, the internal council process, which is changing in regard to identification of potential schemes, the sign-off arrangements, and the general processing of the infrastructure elements in the planning process, which is going through significant change at the moment. We've heard all that. is there anything that we can say which either expresses our view because we still have concerns, or is helpful in expediting the changes which have been outlined to us in the report this evening? Councillor Sunnox.
I have three specific things that we might be able to do. First is we could request a robust response to the ECC, the latest version of the developer's document, which is already in progress, but we could support that. The second is we could further support the infrastructure deficit review, which had its budget cut earlier, and so we're trying to do it internally. And the third thing is that we should be looking at we need to come back to the process for deciding which items are collected, which we haven't been able to discuss because my paper didn't come out. We need to come back, or we need to request a paper describing how that process really should work. I've looked at every bit of paper and every policy I can, and I put down the 5 steps on anything, but I gather I've got them wrong. Can we have some clarification about what the process should be?
The report somewhere says that there should be a middle ranking officer who has total responsibility for driving this area. Does that fall under Councillor Sunnock's recommendation too? Which was there should be support for the infrastructure deficit review. Does that review include having a specific officer to oversee and advise those concerned with planning on these issues?
Once that officer is in place, they will have the time to take forward the infrastructure study, where I have been trying to grapple with, amongst many other things. But just to reassure you, there is no budget cut. That £50,000 was reinstated. So we have that. We're just trying to do what we can in-house, because £50,000 won't go far with consultants. So as much as we can do, and then we'll outsource the rest. Robust response to ECC Developers Guide. The closing date is tomorrow. I haven't had loads of comments back. Yours have been the most robust, and I know you submitted them individually as well, but I was going to go through tomorrow just to see what people had commented, and they have been few and far between, it's fair to say. And their county's approach is quite formulaic, isn't it? But it's only guidance, it's not policy.
Given that this officer is intended to do item 2, not end up as a recommendation to be appointed from item 2, I would certainly like to see the panel lending its weight to the appointment of a specialist to ensure that this system runs like clockwork, if that's agreeable. Councillor Smith.
I think there was also a point that we need to try and prove liaison with the county council to ensure that they are fully responding promptly to planning applications, to make sure that we're not missing out, as we had in the situation that was quoted there. Yes, and I think that's something that has turned out to be a problem, that for whatever reason they don't seem to be getting the responses. Or
Councillor Lismore.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, do they still have the portfolio meetings up at county? So if that's so, why hasn't the portfolio holder raised this with the cabinet member at county? Or if she hasn't, then can she raise it at the next meeting? Because that's why they have these portfolio holder meetings, to raise issue like that with. And I know when I was a cabinet member, we listened very intently when portfolio holders came to us with particular concerns.
Andrea's indicating, I believe, Chair.
Yes, Andrea, tell us what's happening.
We do still have those. Oh, I'm on an echo. Those portfolio reviews, we had one yesterday. I think if the recommendation comes out of this panel, then I'd be more than happy to put it to Essex. And certainly something I would support doing. We have to ask permission to put things on agendas, and then they're quite few and far between, but they are incredibly useful in terms of information. You know, finding out what Essex is up to, and it affects all the stuff that affects us.
Thank you, Ms. Helpful. So would our recommendation be that we ask our portfolio holder to raise the matter of liaison with Essex on the response? If that's okay with you, Karen, it doesn't cut across anything you're doing. Yeah.
Probably a dual thing that we can do once this person's in post. They could pick it up at an officer level as well.
Good. Anything else, colleagues, that we want to ask? So we have 5 recommendations, which we have in sort of bullet form, but which will be turned into magnificent Shakespearean prose by our by someone. Have you got them captured?
Yes, I'm just doing a quick tot up to make sure that I've got the right number. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
You've got them captured. Good, okay. And I won't embarrass you by asking you to read them out, so we know what they were. It's agreed that those 5 points are the output of the panel this rather long evening. Good. Agreed. Okay, thank you. Work programme, we have one more meeting and the agenda for that is already fixed in the civic year.
Chairman, do we not have annual scrutiny report item 13?
Oh, yes, crumbs, yes. You're so cruel, Councillor Smith. The annual scrutiny report. Sorry. Yes, item 13, annual scrutiny report. We have to do it properly. A draft has been produced, which is based on our deliberations, our research for the year, and which seemed to faithfully report what we had done. An additional paragraph was proposed at the agenda briefing, just to clarify how Cabinet had responded to the many recommendations that we had made to them. And they have discussed and taken on board most of the issues that we raised. And they didn't always agree with us, but we've argued the case, and in most cases it was agreed. We don't know what will happen at tomorrow's meeting, but we're taking a bit of guess on that. And if it turns out to be totally wrong, then there is an opportunity to revise it. And I think we could bring it to the group spokespersons if it needs any adjustment after we agree it this evening, if indeed we do agree it with it this evening. Any further comments on the scrutiny report? Okay, so we agree that's subject to the group spokes making any adjustments if it's wrong following tomorrow's meeting. Yeah. Work programme. Anything to add on the work programme, Owen?
Nothing to add from me.
Nothing from the panel. Can I thank you for your attendance this evening? Sorry it's a long meeting, but we had some difficult suggestions. And it's good training for tomorrow night, which I suggest will be of a similar duration. Thank you. Safe journey home.